Chapter 1037. There were nearly 5,000 names, and it would take some time to recite all of them. Even though Yang Er's speed was not slow, it still took him 4 hours. During this time, there was no other sound outside the city except for the sound of the wind. Everyone was listening attentively, as if every name that was called out was imprinted in their hearts. When the last name was read out, in front of everyone, Yang Chendong raised his right hand and said loudly, "Invading without a reason, a life for a life. Today, these people are sentenced to death and will be executed immediately. Guards kill. Kill." More than 4,000 soldiers of the 5th Division shouted in unison. Kill. Nearly 800 black cavalry soldiers shouted in unison. Kill. 10,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division shouted in unison. Kill. More than 200,000 people on the city gate tower shouted in unison. The sound of killing shook the heavens, and nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners trembled in fear. Some of the more timid ones could no longer stand and fell to the ground. Under the sound of killing, 454 Siamese soldiers were executed. Their mouths were gagged in advance, so when they died, they did not make a single sound. No one knew if they had admitted their mistake at this moment, or if they wanted to continue cursing. But these were no longer important. What was important was that they were dead and could no longer pose any threat to the 5-star army. Since ancient times, many people had said that killing prisoners of war was an ominous thing. But this time, when Yang Chendong ordered the prisoners to be killed, no one made a different sound. Firstly, they were not prisoners at all. They were just enemies who had temporarily lost their ability to fight. Secondly, the souls of the 5th Division, especially the Black Cavalry, had to be avenged. These people should have died on the battlefield long ago. It was not a bad thing to make use of them. The machete fell, and 4,054 heads fell to the ground. Nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners had completely lost their will to fight. At this moment, they suddenly understood how precious life was and how lucky they were. With the deaths of these people, the 5-star army became even more famous. Everyone saw the attitude of the 5-star army towards the dead. It was said that not only the direct troops of the 5-star army, but also the Cambodian soldiers who died in the battle and the civilians of Suing City, who participated in the resistance against the enemy, received a handsome pension. It was said that Bugnam of Gojoseon had promised that the families of these martyrs would be given jobs. In other words, he was not only responsible for the dead, but also for the living. As soon as the news came out, the number of people who signed up to join the army in Cambodia increased by several times. Many young men were still complaining that the appearance of the 5-star army had broken the peace of their lives. However, when they saw the attitude of Yang Chendong towards the civilians of Suing City, their mentality changed. They realized that Bugnam of Gojoseon really treated them as his own people. He was really working hard for them to have a better life in the future. On top of this, there was only one more condition, which was to respect the Han people. So what? When did ordinary people have the final say? When did they ever enjoy real freedom? There was only one more Han Chinese above them. As long as they acknowledged this point, they would be able to live a better life and obtain more freedom. So why not? No one liked being born inferior. However, when the general trend was like this, there was nothing they could do to change it. In such an environment, being a soldier to defend the country could give them a new hope. They even had the opportunity to raise their status and bring glory to their ancestors. So what reason did they have not to do it? In fact, as early as the moment the Phnom Penh dynasty became the province of Cambodia, some policies about Yang Xia had been spread. However, most people did not believe it. Today, Yang Chendong used facts to teach everyone a lesson. This kind of doubtful thoughts finally disappeared, allowing more people to see the difference between the 5-star army and making more people envious. There were also more people who launched practical actions and began to sign up for enlistment. Ding Dingwei and Da-in told the good news to Yang Chendong. Then they looked forward to it. They were happy about the change in the people's views. Although they were former officials of the Phnom Penh dynasty, they could still see who treated the people better. Yang Chendong really wanted to let the people under his rule live a happier life. With this, they should support him. The reason why they looked forward to it was because they were worried that Yang Qindong would not allow these ambitious young people to join the army. After all, the 5-star army paid attention to the elite route. It had always been the quality of the soldiers rather than the quantity. It was also possible to refuse these people to join the army. However, this would greatly reduce their enthusiasm, which would increase the difficulty of managing them in the future. Under their expectant gazes, Yang Qindong pondered for a moment before giving his answer. Since they are so hot-blooded, how can we hurt their hearts? Then let's arrange for an assessment. If the conditions permit, and if there are no problems with identity and background, they can join the army. Yang Qindong actually agreed, which naturally made Ding Dingwei and De En happy. But then there was another problem. De En quickly said, "Sixth young master, this time there are many people who signed up for the army. Not only Suing City, but many young people of the right age in many towns nearby. If they pass the assessment and political review, can they all join the army?" Of course. Yang Qindong did not understand what Den meant. On the other hand, Ding Dingwei quickly said, "Sixth young master, it's like this. This time, there are a lot of people, and there should be a lot of people who pass the assessment. If they all join the army, then the military strength of Cambodia will naturally increase by several times, so the financial pressure will naturally be great. It doesn't matter. As long as they are physically qualified and willing, we can accept them. But we have to explain to them in advance that Cambodia alone does not need so many soldiers. They will have a new place to go in the future. As long as we are prepared, we can accept as many as we want." In this battle, Yang Qindong saw the drawbacks of insufficient military strength. Although he had this feeling before, with the elite route, even if the enemy had a large number of soldiers, what could they do? They would still be defeated by him. But this time, in the face of the sudden attack of the Siamese army, the lack of military strength was finally revealed. Yang Qindong finally understood that sometimes, it was not enough to have a good number of soldiers. It was the truth that ants could kill an elephant. A small country like Siam gave him so much pressure. If he wanted to conquer the West in the future, and occupy a larger area of land, how could he do it without enough military strength? If that was the case, he would just recruit soldiers. Other forces could support so many soldiers, so how could Yang Xie not be able to do it? Out of consideration for the future, Yang Qindong agreed to the expansion of the military. Not only that, but he also sent a message to several other provinces. He knew very well that it wouldn't take long for the news of Cambodia province's recruitment to spread out. By then, the men from other provinces would inevitably ask for such a request. Instead of waiting for them to ask for instructions, it was better to just let it go. He wanted to see how many soldiers he could gather with his forces. Just like that, the matter of conscription was settled. As usual, he only sent a telegram to the Crimson City Lord Manor and the military to state the facts. This clearly showed his attitude. "I'm only informing you, not asking for your opinion. Just do as you're told." The recruitment was handed over to Ding Dingwei and Dagan, who were familiar with the local environment. In Suing City, Yang Qindong received Lu Zhua, the commander of the new 1st Cavalry Division, who had just arrived. Yang Qindong did not have to be polite to this old subordinate. After learning that Lu Zhua's condition was stable and there were no symptoms of acclimatization, he said, "Since there is no problem with the army, then go and prepare. We will set off in 2 days. It is time to seek justice from Siam." The king of Siam was in Bangkok. General Tong had already fled in defeat. However, he had already lost his freedom the moment he entered the royal capital. He was captured by the king's guards who had been waiting here for a long time, and locked up in prison. This time, Siam King Ili Chi believed Tong's words. He sent an army to reinforce the eastern front. He even sent out the few cannons he had. However, in the end he did not manage to capture Yang Qindong, but the news of the army's defeat. Since the matter had failed, someone had to take responsibility for it. Tong naturally became the culprit. For this matter, Ili found Prime Minister Hammond and personally announced his decision to behead Tong Si. According to him, if a general lost a battle, he had to be punished, especially when the 5-star army's counterattack was imminent. If he did not deal with Tong, the other generals would not do their best. In the end, they would lose the battle and flee back to the capital. Hamad had a different view on the king's order. From his point of view, when the two armies were at war, it was not auspicious to kill one's general. It would only disappoint the other generals. But since it was the king's order, he had to obey. Therefore, he arranged for someone to go to the dungeon and announced that Tong would be locked up and executed after the battle. From his point of view, since it had to be done, it was best to delay it as much as possible and not let the bad news spread. Tong, who was only one step away from success, was locked up in the dungeon and waiting to be executed after the battle. If he had known this would happen, it would be hard to say if he would have escaped back to the royal city. What Tong didn't expect was that even though he was about to die, the 5-star army didn't let him off. He fainted after consuming a meal, and when he opened his eyes, he was already out of the dungeon. He couldn't believe that someone would spend a huge sum of money to buy him out of the dungeon. Chapter 1038. The person said that he was General Tong's family, and they were willing to exchange him for someone of similar stature. He was just a dying man. When the prison guard saw the large amount of gold and silver, he handed him over without much thought. After all, he was going to die anyway, so no one would pay attention to him. However, they did not know that this was the beginning of the disaster for Siam. Everything started with Yang Chendong's telegram reprimanding the intelligence department. The Siamese army split into two groups and marched towards Cambodia to intimidate Laos. The 5-star army actually didn't notice such an important military intelligence. It was no wonder that Yang Chendong scolded Yang San in the telegram for being useless. If he couldn't do it, then he should find someone capable to do it. Feeling Yang Chendong's anger, Yang San sent a secret telegram to Golden Rooster, who was in charge of the situation in Southeast Asia. However, this telegram was like a stone thrown into the sea. Helplessly, they had to send someone to investigate. Finally, they received news that Wu Gui, who was temporarily in charge of Sky Sparrow, had been captured by the Siamese army. He was nicknamed Golden Rooster, and his real name was Wu Gui. Just like the Great Ming Dynasty had the Genie Guards and the East Faction Guards, and the 5-star army had the Ministry of State Security and the CIA, Siam also had its own intelligence organization, and they had found Wu Gui's location in advance. It was in an inconspicuous courtyard in Bangkok. Siam beat them at their own game. They did not take him down immediately. Instead, under the instructions of Prime Minister Hamad, they only watched him and did not alert the enemy. When the Siam army was preparing for war, Wu Gui, nicknamed Golden Rooster, was gathering his subordinates for a meeting. The Siam army broke in and captured him. They killed 7 members of the intelligence department on the spot, including Golden Rooster. Because the matter was done secretly, and the key members of the intelligence department who knew about Golden Rooster's whereabouts were either dead or captured, the security department did not know about this at all. It was not until Yang Chendong's telegram that they could not contact him that they sent someone to investigate. Only then did they know everything. The intelligence network of the Ministry of State Security in Siam was wiped out. When the news reached Chichen City, 5th Madame Su Maner, who was in charge of the CIA, felt that her opportunity had arrived. Since the establishment of the CIA, although it had done some things, its contributions were not very great. The reason was that the intelligence network of the Security Bureau had been established long ago. At this time, it was not easy for the CIA to insert a rod into it. Not only did they have to face the obstruction of enemy intelligence departments, but they also had to be suppressed by the Ministry of State Security. That's right, it was true that Su Maner was Yang Chendong's 5th madam, but Yang San was a servant who had followed Yang Chendong for many years. He was extremely trusted and valued. When it came to intelligence, he was naturally unwilling to give in. For the sake of the 5th madam, he had already shown enough respect by not directly suppressing the CIA. It was very difficult for the CIA, which was established late and had lost the initiative, to gain any achievements. As the person behind the scenes, Su Maner had been looking for an opportunity to make a breakthrough. Finally, the opportunity had come. The incident in Siam made her feel that there was an opportunity to take advantage of. Immediately, she sent out a very clean female intelligence member, nicknamed Chingxi, to secretly go to the capital of Siam. According to Su Maner's intention, Qingxi's arrival was to investigate more of the Siam army's movements, as well as whether or not she could analyze their next move. After Qingxi arrived, she learned that General Tong had returned to the capital through buying information with a large sum of money. As such, she immediately bribed someone to be a spy in the prison, wanting to keep an eye on this General Tong. Qingxi had a feeling that the sixth young master would not spare this person. Then his every move had to be carefully monitored. What she did not expect was that the king of Siam was so decisive and actually gave the order to execute him after the war. Since there was no chance to kill this person on the battlefield, Qingxi had the idea that she could not let him go. Thus, she spent a large sum of money to exchange him in the name of Tong's family. After taking down Tong in this way, Qingxi reported the matter. In her opinion, it was just a trivial matter. However, she did not expect that this telegram would be sent to Yang Qindong. The original intention was for Su Maner to ask how she wanted to punish the culprit. In Yang Qindong's eyes, his eyes could not help but light up. You must hide him well. If it is not safe, kill him on the spot. In short, do not leave any traces behind. Try your best to deny this matter to the outside world. I have great use for it. After sending this telegram, Yang Qindong immediately sent another telegram to Luo Pu, the commander of the Second Army, who had already made preparations to send out troops in Wanxiang City. He allowed him to send out troops to Siam, and reminded him that all logistical matters could be handled by the governor of Lao Province, Luan Shaoqian. After sending out these two telegrams, Yang Qindong's third telegram was also sent out. It was sent to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Qiqian City, Ma Dali. He requested to send people to Siam as soon as possible to negotiate. After sending out the telegram, Yang Qindong waved his hand and sent out troops to Siam. He had the 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division of the New Army, half of the 5th Division of the Lu Army, and a total of 50,000 Cambodian soldiers, temporarily recruited. In total, he had more than 70,000 people. It was quite a powerful force. Next, it was time for him to seek justice. Wanxiang City. After receiving the telegram, the commander of the Second Army, Luo Pu, took the initiative to look for Luan Shaoqian and Long Tainan. He said that he would immediately send out troops according to the sixth young master's orders, and asked them to help and cooperate with him. Whether it was Luan Shaoqian or Long Tainan, they were both relatives of Yang Qindong. In addition, one of them was the leader of Laos, while the other was in charge of the stability of the public security under Yang Qindong's influence. Both of them were very powerful. Even though Luo Pu was already a major general, he still showed a lot of respect when he saw them. Commander Luo, don't worry. Lao Province will definitely listen to the orders of the sixth young master. We will fully support you. If you want money, we will give you money. If you want things, we will give you things. This was Luan Xiaoqian's declaration. Then came Long Tianan's voice. Commander Luo, don't worry. I have already discussed with General He Guang. We will try our best to keep up with your pace. During this period, we have recruited a total of 40,000 soldiers. We will fully support you. After more than 10 days, while the situation in Suing City was worrying, Luan Shaoqian and Long Tainan did not stay idle. After they reached a common goal, they did something very bold without being able to contact Yang Qindong. That was to recruit soldiers on the spot, especially the police force. Under Long Tianan's request, many people joined the army and became members of the Lao Army. This allowed the army to expand in a short period of time, and reached a total of 40,000 people. It was also proven that their thoughts were the same as Yang Qindong's. As expected, Cambodia province started to expand the army. However, Lao province's actions were done before this order. Because of this, Luan Shaoqian and Long Tainan jointly signed a telegram to Yang Qindong to ask for forgiveness. Not only was military power important, it was also very sensitive. It was like a double-edged sword. If used well, it could be used to kill the enemy. If not, it would hurt oneself. Knowing this, the two of them had to show some attitude. Of course, Yang Qindong also had to show some attitude. He ended the telegram by telling them not to do it again. This was also a reminder to some people that privately recruiting and dispatching troops was not allowed. This warning was a warning that it would not happen again. After receiving support, Commander Luo Pa finally let loose. Other than the 7th Division who remained in Vietnam to stabilize the situation, the 2nd Division and the 6th Division moved out. They suddenly left Wanxiang City and charged towards the Siamese camp outside the city. Following behind these two divisions were the 40,000 newly recruited Lao Lao army soldiers. They were made up of young and strong Lao Lao army soldiers who had yet to get used to each other. At this point, the North, South and East 5-star armies started to retaliate against Siam. On the north was the 2nd and 6th Divisions led by Luo Pa, as well as the 40,000 Lao soldiers, a total of 67,000 men. On the east was the 1st Cavalry Division led by Yang Chendong, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army, half of the 5th Division and 50,000 Cambodian soldiers, a total of 74,000 men. On the south was the 1st and 2nd Divisions of the 1st and 2nd Divisions of the 1st C Division. They had a total of 17,000 soldiers. Among them, C's 2nd Division Zhao Changchao had already captured Pearl Island, later known as Phuket Island, cutting off Siam's southern road by land. After C's 1st Division occupied Samui Island, they used the water to enter the land and surrounded Pattaya, later known as Tabaya, which was southeast of Bangkok, forming complete control over the entire southern sea of Siam. When the North Army left Wanxiang City, they caught the Siam Army off guard. Over the past few days, the Siam Army had gotten used to the 5-star Army's defense and did not expect them to suddenly attack. The 20,000 unprepared Siam Army was crippled by the 2nd and 6th Divisions of the Lu Army. Amidst the sounds of gunfire, they were defeated. In less than an hour, they left behind 3,000 corpses and fled. Luo Pajuan left the task of cleaning up the battlefield to the 40,000 Lao soldiers led by Long Tainan and General He Guang. Then he continued to lead the 2 army divisions to Wulong City, an important city in the north of Siam. At this moment, Siam's General Godin was in the city. He had just heard the news of the 5-star Army's attack. Not long after, he saw his soldiers being defeated. He also saw the 5-star Army soldiers in green chasing after his soldiers. The intelligence personnel had already reported the information. Every 5-star Army soldier who could wear a formal suit belonged to the elite faction. They were not easy to deal with. Although Godin had 200,000 soldiers, he did not dare to be careless. He immediately ordered his men to prepare to defend the city. Cannons, bows, rocks, and kerosene were all prepared. For the sake of safety, he didn't even have the slightest intention of letting the 10,000 defeated soldiers outside the city into the city. Chapter 1039. If they didn't open the gates, they would only lose 10,000 soldiers. Once they opened the gates, the main force would be in danger. With the city's defense and the 50 cannons, they might be able to inflict heavy damage to the main force of the 5-star Army. General Gordon was ambitious. This time, he wanted to use his actions to humiliate the 5-star Army. He wanted to tell them that the Siamese Army wasn't like the Tsonglan Army or the Phnom Penh Army. They were capable of fighting. While Gordon was waiting for the enemy to approach the city, the 5-star Corps stopped moving. They took out their 100mm mortars and aimed at the city tower. Gordon was waiting for the enemy to approach the city so that he could destroy one of them with his cannons. The 5-star Corps stopped moving. They took out their 100mm mortars and aimed at the city tower. Looking down from above, Gordon saw that the 5-star Army stopped moving when they were 5 miles away. He didn't understand what they were up to. He didn't have to wait for long before reality told him the truth. Luo Pa ordered the cannons to open fire. The mortar cannons could fire up to 13 li away. Using Wulong City, which was only 5 li away, as a target, it was as easy as playing a game. A total of 40 cannons rained down on the city walls, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Gordon, who was waiting for the enemy to approach, didn't expect the enemy to open fire from such a distance. His cannons could only fire up to a distance of 1,000 meters. This caused him to subconsciously limit his vision. Then, amidst the explosions, he was knocked to the ground by the shockwave. Fortunately, the soldiers beside him were very diligent. They pushed General Gordon to the ground. With 1 dead, 1 heavily injured and 2 lightly injured, Gordon was safe and sound. He only lost his hearing temporarily. Not only Gordon, the Siamese soldiers on the city tower also lost their hearing. Other than the buzzing sound, they couldn't hear anything from the outside world. After a round of bombardment, the 2nd and 6th Division started to charge forward. To the cold front warriors who had to train at least 3 to 5 kilometers a day, a distance of 2,500 meters was nothing. Under the cover of the artillery, they arrived at the city gate that had already been destroyed. After a round of gunfire, they opened up a path and easily killed their way into the city. On the tower, the 50 cannons that had been transported to the North Tower had been reduced to a pile of scrap metal. Beside him, there were almost 1,000 dead bodies of the Siamese soldiers. The other survivors, including General Gordon, had already fled downstairs. In other words, it wasn't that they were useless. It was that their opponents were too strong. Facing the 2nd and 6th Division, who were fully equipped with firearms, the Siamese soldiers were caught off guard. They didn't even know much about them. Thus, they suffered a great loss in the first battle. The 200,000 soldiers of the Siamese army retreated like fish in the sea. It could be said that human potential was infinite. With the mentality of saving their lives, the Siamese soldiers retreated so quickly that the 5-star army couldn't catch up to them. Except for a few who managed to catch up, the main force of the Siamese army fled south. After the victory of the first battle, they killed and captured 30,000 Siamese soldiers. Wulong City was handed over to the Laotian army. After a simple rest, Luo Yin led the 2 divisions and continued south. The news of the defeat on the northern battlefield quickly spread back to Manga City. In the palace hall, King Yi Liqi showed an expression of disbelief and asked a very idiotic question in front of all the civil and military officials. What is the 5-star army doing? Are they going to destroy Siam like they did to Lan Song and Golden Rim? Proud people would always magnify their own strengths for no reason, but at the same time, they would also magnify their enemies' weaknesses. In Yi Liqui's eyes, Siam was the strongest army in the world. Perhaps it was a little weaker than the 5-star army, but they had their own strengths. How could they be bullied so easily? Yi Liqui's shout attracted a lot of discussion in the palace. Then, Prime Minister Hamad stood up and said, "Your Majesty, the 5-star army is coming. Looking at the fate of Lan Song and Golden Rim, we must be prepared for a war. Sure, let's fight. Who's afraid?" Siam had just entered the era of big cities. In comparison, its politics were clean and the people were loyal. Its strength was not weak. This was also where Yi Liqui's foundation lay. Before the war, Yi Liqui had found Hamad and a few other important officials. After a discussion, they agreed that the 5-star army was not strong enough to destroy Siam. In other words, even if they lost the war, they could just lower their heads and give some compensation. The possibility of the country being destroyed was still very small. It was because of this point that Yi Liqui agreed to send troops. He wanted to take the 5-star army by surprise and reshuffle the cards in Southeast Asia. Now it seemed that it did play a role in the early stages. They even surrounded Yang Chendong. At that time, victory was so close. Unfortunately, Tong Si did not take advantage of this opportunity. In the end, he missed out on victory. Since they could not win, they had to think about how to stay in an invincible position. Considering the plan prepared before the war, Prime Minister Hamad continued, "Your Majesty, I request to send a message to the 5-star army to negotiate. Please allow it." Approved. Yi Liqui had to nod and agree. Unless he was prepared to fight to the death with the 5-star army, he could only negotiate and use this method to quell the flames of war. Under the cold consent of King Yi Liqui, the royal capital Bangkok once again gathered 200,000 troops to prepare for war. They were ready to support the various battlefields at any time. At the same time, they also sent a message to the 5-star army to express their intention to negotiate. The so-called peace talks were often the result of fighting. Fighting and fighting, fighting and fighting, everything came to a conclusion. In the end, it was a happy scene for everyone. After the Siam army lost the upper hand, the news of peace talks came. The commander of the East Army, Yang Chendong, who was leading the army to Siam, laughed after hearing the news. All of this was within his expectations. He even sent a telegram to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in advance, and asked them to send people over. Peace talks? They killed so many of our brothers. Now that our reinforcements are here, they are afraid? They want peace talks? How can there be such a good thing in the world? Beta Persei muttered to express his anger. Beta Persei's opinion made Yang Chendong speechless. In this battle, more than 200 black cavalry soldiers and more than 4,000 soldiers of the 5th Division died. It was a heavy loss. But in comparison, what benefits did the Siam army gain? The number of people captured and killed had exceeded 120,000. This was already a 30-fold loss ratio. At this moment, the king of Siam was the one suffering, not him. But then again, the lives of the 5-star army soldiers were very important. How could it be compared to the Siam army? From this point of view, Beta Persei's words were not wrong. That's right. It's impossible to talk about peace and let this matter slide. This time we are determined to get Siam. Yang Chendong's attitude was very firm. Beta Persei's eyes lit up when he heard this. However, Yang Chendong's next words made Beta Persei a little confused. But based on the information we have, Siam prepared a full 800,000 soldiers before this battle. So far, we have destroyed about 200,000 soldiers. There are at least 600,000 soldiers left. Beta Persei, tell me, with our current strength, can we defeat them? Yes, 600,000 is. Beta Persei stopped mid-sentence. This was 600,000, not 60,000. The total number of soldiers of the 5-star armies. Even if the average D-ping were to be included, they would only have around 150 to 160,000 men. Even if they wanted to destroy the enemy, they still had to split up their forces to defend the cities that they had occupied. Beta Persei did not speak, and Yang Chendong did not intend to ask any more questions. Instead, he looked thoughtfully in the direction of Siam. A bold plan was formed in his mind again. This plan could be expressed in a very simple way. There were only 4 words: training troops on the battlefield. Soldiers who had never been on the battlefield could not be considered real warriors. This was true for ordinary soldiers. After a few battles, Yang Chendong had already seen his disadvantage. That was, he had too few troops. If he was so weak to deal with the Siam army, wouldn't he be in the same predicament if he was forced to fight against a bigger force in the future? For the future, he also needed to prepare for military training. How could he create a decent army in a short period of time? Their strength could not be said to be on par with the Cold Front, but at least they had to meet the requirements of a B-level army. After thinking about it, the only good idea was to train troops on the battlefield. With the 600,000 soldiers of Siam as a whetstone, Yang Chendong wanted to see how many B-level troops he could train. In order to achieve this goal, more local battles were needed. That was to say, how to fight the Siamese army continuously and make them send out their troops without getting angry became the most important thing. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that the best way was to talk while fighting. That was why he was so optimistic and hopeful about the upcoming negotiations between the two sides. Before Yang Chendong had to wait too long, someone from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs came. It was their minister, Madali. Yang Chendong was somewhat surprised by Madali's personal visit. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who stayed in Chichen City to preside over the overall situation. How could he come out so easily? Seeing the obvious doubt in Yang Chendong's eyes, Madali smiled bitterly and said, "Sixth young master, for the current Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the most important thing is the war with Siam, so I came in person." Chapter 1040. Haha. Hearing Madali's sincere answer, Yang Chendong smiled. Diplomatic work was usually divided into 3 types: enemies, friends, and countries, regions, or forces in the middle. However, Yang Xie rarely had any hostile forces around him. In the end, it was because of their military and financial strength. It was said that a weak country had no diplomacy. If Yang Chendong were to add another sentence, it would be to strengthen the diplomacy of the strong. Yes, whether it was a strong military or economic power, diplomatic work was relatively easier. Whether it was because of the desire for benefits or the fear of military power, no one was willing to provoke a strong country or force. Therefore, compared to the heavy work of other departments, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was much more relaxed. Finally, there was a strong country like Siam, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs finally had a chance to show its strength. As the minister, Madali simply volunteered to be here. Since the previous minister, Yang Shan, stepped down because of his son, Yang Taiju, Madali had not achieved any outstanding results. Without any achievements, how could he convince the masses? Even when Yu Qian, as the city lord of Crimson City, held meetings with the status of Prime Minister Yang, Madali rarely spoke. He had been looking for an opportunity to show his strength. Now that the opportunity had come, how could he let it go? After knowing Madali's thoughts, Yang Chendong did not make any comments. A subordinate who wanted to achieve results should not be discouraged. On the contrary, he should encourage him. Minister Ma, you have come this time. Whether you can defeat Siam, or even win this war completely depends on your diplomatic skills. As long as you can hold them back, the longer the time, the greater the chance of victory. What do you think? Are you confident? Yang Chendong was telling him the truth. Madali took this opportunity to ask carefully. Sixth young master, have you made up your mind? Do you really want to defeat Siam in one go? Madali was like a poisonous needle that was inserted into the enemy's heart. Yang Chendong naturally had no intention of hiding it from him. That's right. I've already made my decision. But Madali hesitated for a moment. When he saw Yang Chendong's encouraging eyes, he continued, but according to our investigation, Siam has just become a big city. Whether it is military, political, or economic, they are not weak. It will be difficult to take them down in one go. Difficult? It's like a spring. If you're strong, it's weak. Yang Chendong didn't care if the other party knew what a spring was, or if he could understand this saying. He still said decisively, if a person wants to grow, he has to go through some setbacks and difficulties. Similarly, if Yang Xia wants to expand, it has to do something that it knows is difficult. As long as it overcomes these difficulties, it will become stronger. Understood. Since Yang Chendong had already made up his mind, Madali knew that there was no room for negotiation. He said, Sixth young master, tell me, what do you want me to do next? What do I have to do? Haha, it's actually not complicated. You just have to do this and that will do. No one knew what Yang Chendong and Madali talked about, but they only knew that early the next morning, Madali had set up a carriage and led a delegation of more than 100 people, representing the interests of the Yang faction, straight to Manga City. It was inevitable that some of the military officers couldn't understand the departure of the peace negotiators, especially the commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining. In the battle on the Barren Mountain, half of his division had died. This was a grudge that must be avenged. Why would they suddenly enter into a state of peace negotiations? Lu Zhua, the commander of the new army's 1st Cavalry Division, was also puzzled. He had traveled thousands of miles, taking a boat and rushing day and night. He hadn't even fought a single battle. And now they were going to negotiate? Then what was the point of him bringing the 1st Cavalry Division here? In the main tent, whether it was Xiao Yining or Lu Zhua, after Yang Chendong said that they could say anything and ask anything, the two of them took the lead to speak, expressing the puzzlement in the hearts of their subordinates. In response to their questions, Yang Chendong only replied, "Who said we're not going to fight?" Just this one sentence confused the two commanders. Xiao Yining reacted a little faster. "But didn't we already send people to negotiate with Siam?" "That's right." Lu Zhua quickly added. "Who said that we can't continue fighting if we're negotiating? It doesn't matter. They can talk, we'll fight." Yang Chendong waved his hand casually again, as if they had all misunderstood. In response to Yang Chendong's answer, not only the two commanders, but also the other commanders in the main tent were confused. Even the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Tian Hu, was puzzled. He also didn't understand what the 6th young master was going to do. Why? Is it hard to understand? The young master meant that the war and peace negotiations can be carried out at the same time. However, when we fight, we don't have to send our main force to the front like before. Instead, we can send our reserve troops to the front. We can use this opportunity to see if there are any suitable seedlings. Yang Chendong saw that everyone was confused, so he simply explained it clearly. As soon as he said this, A few people were the first to understand, especially Commander Tian Hu. Where did his 1st Cavalry Division come from? Wasn't it formed by constantly fighting on the battlefield and gathering elites? This was going to continue the old path. Naturally, he had the most right to speak. He immediately said, "The 6th young master means to train the soldiers through war?" "That's what I mean. Of course, as veterans who have experienced hundreds of battles, this time, you have to do your job as instructors. Not only that, once you find a good seedling, you can apply for recruitment. The young master will give you a certain amount of talent support. Of course, you have to do your job as instructors and examiners. You have to score every soldier in the war. This is an extremely important matter. Do you understand?" When he said these words, Yang Chendong especially looked at the commander of the 5th Cavalry Division, Xiao Yining. The meaning he wanted to express was very clear. Isn't the 5th Cavalry Division lacking in soldiers? Once this war is over, the 5th Cavalry Division can be reorganized. Even though Yang Chendong's meaning was very clear, and Xiao Yining was indeed moved, there was still a problem that he didn't clarify. Otherwise, he really wouldn't be happy. The 6th young master, if his performance is outstanding, can he be promoted? Of course. Otherwise, how can he join the 5th Cavalry Division? Yang Chendong said as if it was a matter of course. Good. I understand. At this moment, Xiao Yining's face finally revealed a smile. At this moment, he even became a little excited. He was still thinking that with the current ratio of young and strong Han men in Crimson City, it would be difficult to recruit more than 4,000 people. If things went wrong, it would affect the strength of the 5th Cavalry Division. Now that they could train the soldiers on the battlefield and recruit good seedlings, the 5th Cavalry Division would definitely be able to quickly return to its former glory. After the general plan was set, Yang Chendong announced a few more details. For example, only those who killed 10 people on the battlefield would be allowed to be promoted. Other than that, those who performed well would be able to enter the B-grade troops, the auxiliary troops of Crimson City, and those who performed well would be able to enter the C-grade troops, the provincial troops. As for those who didn't perform well, they would be given money to chase them away. In short, they would only fight for the sake of producing elite soldiers. If there were really no suitable candidates, it would be better to not have them than to form an army for the sake of numbers. Otherwise, not only would they be scamming them, they would also be scamming themselves. On the battlefield, the enemy wouldn't be afraid because of the number of soldiers you had. On the battlefield, victory wouldn't be decided by who had more soldiers. Using battle to nurture soldiers was carried out in an orderly manner under Yang Chendong's decision. According to his requirements, any commoner between the age of 16 and 35 who was under the Yang faction's influence could sign up. Then, the various cities would report the list to the various provincial governments, and in the end, the provincial governments would transport the people to the battlefield. In order to encourage people to sign up, Yang Chendong also proposed that the number of soldiers each province could choose would have a close relationship with the provincial governor and the various officers at the end of the year. In the end, there would be a reward system, praising the provinces that performed well, and scolding the provinces that didn't, etc. The temptation of being promoted was already very big, and now that it was directly related to the official rank evaluation, who wouldn't want to try their best? Immediately, under the encouragement and publicity of the local governments, there were many people who signed up. Batches of young men who met the requirements were sent to the North Army's new Second Army, Luopos, and the East Army's Yang Chendongs. In the East Army, the first army that was approved to train soldiers was the 50,000 Cambodian soldiers who followed Yang Chendong. Of course, this was not all the soldiers of the right age in Cambodia. With a population of 4 million, it was not a problem to select a few 100,000 suitable soldiers. These 50,000 soldiers were just the first batch of soldiers to be sent to the battlefield. The power of training soldiers was completely delegated to the 3 division commanders, Tian Hu, Xiao Yining, and Lu Zhua. After a discussion, they decided to only send 2,000 recruits to the battlefield at a time. In order to ensure that they would not be surrounded by the Siamese army, the 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army, and the 5th Division of the Lujuapo would send veterans to accompany them. They would only be sent out when they encountered suitable opponents, so as to ensure that they could complete the training requirements under the circumstances of equal strength and strength. The 5-Star Army had sent out envoys according to the king's request, and the troops were heading to the capital, Bangkok. For this reason, it was said that the 5-Star Army in the south had stopped their attack on Pattaya. After receiving this news, the Siamese army, which was originally very nervous, immediately relaxed. Chapter 1041. It was at this time that a scout suddenly reported that a small unit of the 5-Star Army had left the border city of Bob and was heading towards Shaffa City. After hearing the news, the Siamese army was very puzzled. The Siamese general guarding Shaffa City immediately sent people to stop them, as if he wanted to persuade them to stop moving forward. In the middle of Bob and Shaffa City, the two sides met. On one side was a Cambodian army of 2,000 people, and on the other side was a Siamese army of 5,000 people. The veterans of the 5-Star Army who followed and protected them quickly made a decision. This battle was worth fighting. At least in their eyes, if they were the ones fighting, they would not need 2,000 people, but 1,000 people would be enough to win. With this decision, the first training of the soldiers began. The mixed soldiers were mixed soldiers. They did not have much training, and most of them relied on brute force. The result of the first battle was no surprise. More than 300 of the 2,000 soldiers were killed on the spot, and the rest fled back. According to the information obtained by the veteran scouts, not even 100 Siamese soldiers were killed. When the news reached Yang Chendong's ears, he was not surprised at all. Some soldiers who had not undergone systematic training were just a bunch of brute force. They did not even have a basic degree of cooperation. It was impossible for them to defeat the disciplined Siamese army. Just like the so-called Jianghu people, they might be a headache if they fought alone, but once they gathered together, no matter how many of them there were, they would not be a match for the imperial army. If the army made up of Lao men really wanted to win, they would have to learn how to cooperate, get used to blood, and really mature. Then they might have the qualifications to defeat the Siamese army. Of course, this was not something that could be done overnight. Fortunately, Yang Chendong had time to wait. Even if more of these people died, Yang Chendong would not show any sadness. These were all alien races, and for a certain period of time, he had even thought about how to stop the growth of the alien race population, and what kind of attitude and methods he should adopt towards these adult alien males. This was one of the methods that Yang Chendong had thought of. When a foreign woman married a Han man. From the looks of it, the effects were pretty good. Now that they had the advantage of sacrificing foreign men on the battlefield, even if foreign women wanted to get married in the future, they would have no choice but to choose Han men. This was a way to eliminate the foreign race. At the same time, it was also a kind of gospel for the Han men. It was also a vicious method that Yang Chendong used to unify the Han people. Perhaps some people could see this point. Perhaps there would be people in the future who would comment on this matter. Some people might even criticize his backbone because of this, but Yang Chendong did not care. What he wanted was the day when the Han people became strong and dominated the world. As for what others thought of him, it was not important. To paraphrase a saying, who cares if there is a flood after his death? The first attack failed, but soon the second Cambodian army was sent out. They were either inspired by the fact that the 5-Star Army, with less than 10,000 people, could fight for so long against the Siamese army and won a great victory. So they looked down on the Siamese army. Or maybe the conditions that Yang Chendong gave to the victors were so good that they could not bear to try. Or maybe it was because they wanted to prove themselves through this battle. They wanted to tell their relatives in their hometown and their women that the 5-Star Army was not the only one in the world who knew how to fight. They were real men and they could do it too. Regardless of the reason, there were waves of Cambodian soldiers. Under the control of the 5-Star Army, they were divided into groups of 2,000 people and entered the Siamese territory, looking for an opportunity to fight the Siamese army. At this moment, in the capital of Siam, Manga City, Minister Madali had appeared as the representative of Yang Xie. He was warmly received by Prime Minister Hamad. What was a politician? The performance of the two men was obvious. No matter how fierce the battle was before and how many people were killed or injured, when they met this time, their faces were full of joy. Those who did not know the inside story would definitely think that the two men must be old friends. They would never think that they were scheming against each other. On the way into the city, Hamad even prepared a small welcoming ceremony to show the people that Siam still loved peace. Even when the situation was good, they still negotiated with the emissary sent by Yang Xie. This showed that they were broad-minded. Yes, in the hearts of most of the Siamese who did not know the situation, they were the most powerful when they had just entered the city. Even in this battle against the five-star army, from the beginning until now, they had always been in a dominant position. Not long ago, there was news that the leader of the five-star army was surrounded by them. If it were not for the sake of peace in the future, and wanting to persuade the leader to surrender, they would have killed him directly. That was a war where hundreds of thousands of people surrounded less than 10,000 enemies. Even if everyone spat, the war would have ended. Madali walked beside Hammond with a smile on his face as they crossed the street. In fact, he and his team had heard the discussions of the people on the streets. Those who were able to enter the Foreign Affairs Department were naturally knowledgeable people. Among them, there were many graduates of the Yang Family Academy and the Crimson City Academy. When they entered the school, they were exposed to a course called Foreign Languages. In the words of the founder, Yang Chendong, if you want to defeat your enemy, you must first understand your enemy. For this reason, Madali had brought many talents who understood Siamese into this team. Even he had no problem conversing with them. With this advantage, the conversations of the people on the street naturally fell into their ears. This allowed them to have a deeper understanding of the situation in Bangkok and obtain first-hand information. All of this was outside of Hamad's expectations. He was certain that there were people who understood Siamese in this team, just like how there were people who understood Chinese beside him. However, the number was definitely not too many. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lined the streets to express his sincerity. Both parties passed through the commotion, and finally arrived at the courtyard in the city that was specially used to receive foreign ambassadors. Upon entering, the originally smiling Madali and Hamad seemed to have changed into a different person. Their smiles were retracted and replaced with a solemn expression. Esteemed envoy Ma, you must be tired from the long journey. Take a rest for the night. If there is anything else, we will discuss it tomorrow. Hamad didn't immediately enter his role. He needed to give Madali some time to rest. He also needed to think carefully about what to do next. Madali acted as if he didn't understand Hamad's words. Only when the interpreter translated the words into Chinese did he nod and say, "Thank you for your understanding. Since that is the case, we will meet again tomorrow." When he said that he would see her the next day, no one would have thought that this delay would be half a month later. Of course, at this moment, Hamad was truly prepared to have a good discussion with Madali tomorrow and see what the other party wanted. Therefore, after settling down the five-star army ambassadors, he headed straight for the palace. According to his intention, he would first report to the king and receive a general decree. Upon entering the palace, not only did Hamad see the king, Yi, he also saw another first-rank general guarding the western border of Siam, Chun Hong. According to the Great Ming Dynasty's system, Chun Hong was considered a relative of the emperor. His sister married Yi and was deeply favored by the emperor. Because of this, he was promoted several times from a small general stationed with 100 soldiers. In the end, he became a first-rank general, second only to Gordon. Relatives of the king were not allowed to interfere in politics. This was the same everywhere. Thus, Chun Hong had no choice but to leave the capital and head to the safest western border of Siam. He became a first-rank general in name, and was mainly responsible for dealing with the Awol dynasty. To put it bluntly, he was completely a figurehead. This time, they had started an all-out war with the five-star army. They had seized the initiative and were now in a stalemate. The situation was gradually developing in a bad direction. It could be said that it was the time for the entire country to mobilize their troops. As a first-rank general, Chun Hong naturally returned. Not only that, when he returned, he brought with him good news that he had just received from the military. The five-star army's attacks from the north and east had suddenly become weak. News of the Siam army's victories came from the front lines. Translator. Nyebo Studio Editor. Nyebo Studio. Good news made Yelinki very happy. After knowing the purpose of Chun Hawang's visit, Yelinki immediately welcomed him. Yelinki knew the whole story and knew that the five-star army had been launching attacks every day. Although the scale of the attacks was not very big, it was a real attack. The Siamese army naturally fought back. Originally, they were expecting a fierce battle. But who would have thought that the five-star army could not fight anymore? Is this true? King Yiliqui's face was filled with disbelief as he asked. Yes, there are battle reports from all sides. One of them was written by General Gordon himself. Chun Hong said with a face full of flattery and joy. As the saying goes, love the house and its crow. Since he liked Chun Hawang's sister, Yiliqui naturally did not dislike Chun Hong. Now that Chun Hong brought news of victory, he could not help but laugh heartily. This was the first time Yiliqui laughed heartily since the start of the war with the five-star army. At this time, Hammond entered the palace to report the situation. When he saw the king laughing so happily, he was also curious. Your Majesty, when did you become so happy? Tell me and I will be happy too. Ah, good. General Chun, tell the Prime Minister about this. Yiliqui was in a good mood and immediately agreed. Chapter 1042. With a smile on his face, Chun Hong turned around and bowed to Hammond. He then said, Prime Minister, news just came from the front lines. The five-star army's attack is weak. After several battles, they have suffered heavy losses. Our side has won. And this is all thanks to His Majesty. His Majesty's troops represent the righteous. Even the heavenly sect was moved, resulting in today's victory. Chun Hong did not forget to take the opportunity to flatter the king. At the same time, he was carefully observing Hammond's reaction. Just like in most dynasties, civil and military were at odds. In Siam, civil and military rarely got along. In particular, the reason why Chun Hong left the capital for Shijiang was because of the advice of Hammond and the other civil officials. He hated these people from the bottom of his heart. But because the king valued these civil officials, he had no choice but to deal with them. But no action did not mean no thoughts. During his time in Shijiang, Chun Hong was constantly thinking about revenge. This time, he was looking for an opportunity to do so. In his view, if he wanted to take revenge, the first person he had to deal with was the Prime Minister, who wielded enormous influence in the court. If he did not topple this mountain, once the war was over, he would probably have to return to the western border to suffer. Prime Minister Hammond didn't think too much about it. At least at this moment, his mind was completely focused on government affairs. When he heard Chun Hong say that the situation on the front lines was starting to turn for the better, he was truly confused. If not for the fact that he understood General Gordon and knew that this person was the worst at lying, he would have doubted the veracity of this matter. Since even General Gordon said that the front lines had won, Hammond had to think carefully about what was going on. From the bottom of his heart, Hammond did not believe it. A five-star army that could defeat the Jiaoxi Kingdom, the Lansong Dynasty, and the Goldenbian Dynasty, as well as occupy the Luzon Island and a large area of the sea. They stunned everyone from the moment they appeared. With their strong financial resources and powerful military capabilities, there were few who would not follow their orders. How could such an army suddenly have such a low combat strength? This didn't make any sense at all. Hammond suddenly stopped talking. He didn't express any opinion and just stood there with a frown on his face. Chun Hong saw all of this, and it was difficult for him to find a weakness. He had no choice but to continue asking, Prime Minister, why do you look unhappy? Are you unhappy that the army won the battle at the front lines? After this reminder, even King Ilichi paid attention to it. But out of trust he still said, How can that be? The Prime Minister is the Prime Minister of Siam. He will naturally be happy to hear that the frontline army has won the battle. Yes, of course I'm happy. At this moment, Hammond also recovered and hurriedly replied. But after saying this, he still voiced out his doubts. It's just that the five-star army has always been known for their extraordinary combat strength. Why did they suddenly become weak this time? Weakened? Chun Hong finally caught the opportunity and said, "How can it be weakened? It should be because our Siam army is too strong. Under His Majesty's wise leadership, we have vigorously developed our military. The treatment and training of the army are the best. Why can't such a good army win the battle? Prime Minister, as a general leading an army, I really can't agree with what you're saying." The Siamese army was indeed stronger than the other neighboring countries. But if it was said that they could easily defeat the five-star army, Hammond would never believe it. He decided to see for himself and personally go to the front line to see for himself. "Your Majesty, I am willing to go to the front line. Please allow it." This was Hammond's strength. He would not easily agree with the opinions of others. He would only make a decision after seeing the results. This was also the reason why Li Qi felt at ease using him, so he didn't even hesitate and agreed to this request. Hammond had something on his mind, so he didn't stay for long. Before he left, he only said that the emissary from the five-star army had arrived, and before the battle was completely settled, he still had to receive him with courtesy. He then left the palace hall, leaving behind Chun Hong to watch him leave. He said with some dissatisfaction, "Your Majesty, he doesn't trust our army and General Gordon." Sighed General Chun, "Don't think too much. Prime Minister is such a serious person. It's good to let him see. That way, we can rest assured." Li Qi was not influenced by Chun Huang's words. In his heart, he didn't really believe this news. He also hoped that someone could make a trip. Hammond's volunteering was exactly what he wanted. Ma Dali, who was in the emissary group's courtyard, did not know about this. The next morning, not only did he not see Hammond, who was supposed to be here, but everyone was also grounded. Considering that the two countries were at war, they were not allowed to leave the courtyard for fear of being affected. Fortunately, food and drinks were delivered in time. Otherwise, the minister would have to consider whether Siam was going to reveal their true intentions. The training of the soldiers on the northern and eastern fronts continued. The battle situation did not improve. The 40,000 Laotian soldiers on the northern front and the 50,000 Cambodian soldiers on the eastern front were sent out for battle for the third time. Relatively speaking, they would still lose against the Siam army. It was just that they did not lose as quickly. However, it was still far from a draw. It was also at this time that a steady stream of reserve troops arrived. After receiving Yang Qindong's orders, the provinces immediately started recruiting soldiers. The attractive policies were also spread to all the provinces under Yang Xie's control. Once they performed well, they could be promoted. Such a temptation tempted the foreign youths, who knew the power of the Han people, to no avail. With the opportunity in front of them, there were not many who did not want to seize it and give it a try. There were many such applicants. In a short period of time, 200,000 youths had signed up. It was said that this was only a portion of the total. There would be more applicants in the future. Since there were so many people who wanted to sign up, Yang Qindong naturally did not reject any of them. Yang Xie, who did not lack food, was never afraid of having too many people. He only despised having too few people. When the new batch of soldiers arrived, the disadvantage on the battlefield became even more obvious. In contrast, the morale of the Siam army was increasing day by day. The continuous victories had made some of the soldiers feel smug. When they found out that as long as they encountered the five-star army, they would definitely be the ones to win. Although they didn't get much, they still had some achievements. They could report their military exploits and receive money. Therefore, everyone became more active. This was especially true when they discovered that their numbers were too large, and they often couldn't find an opponent. When their numbers were only around 2,000, the five-star army would take the initiative to jump out. They immediately divided their troops into groups of 2,000, allowing them to obtain more small-scale victories. A small victory was still a victory. Wasn't there a saying that went, "Many a little makes a man"? The Siam army was tirelessly busy. There were reports of victory every day. They were delivered to the commander of the army. Prime Minister Hammond, who had come to understand the actual situation, saw everything clearly. The battle reports were real. From time to time, some corpses of the five-star army soldiers would be sent back. These could not be faked. All of this made Hammond speechless. Even the Siam army in the east had achieved such a great victory. With General Gordon leading the army in the north, there was nothing to doubt about the results. What was going on? Was the five-star army's strength not enough due to the continuous expansion? Or was their standard just average to begin with? It was just that people had made them legends. Hammond could not understand this question. However, there was no need to think about it. Since they had achieved victory on the battlefield, there was nothing to be afraid of. He had to immediately return to the capital to report. At the same time, he had to change his strategy against the five-star army. Negotiations could be discussed. However, this time, he did not have to compromise. Instead, he had to force the other party to compromise. This was something he had to consider. Satisfied, Hammond left. On the morning of his departure, news came from the Security Bureau. Yang Sen had arranged for Yun Kei, who was recuperating in Chichen City, to return to Siam. With Golden Rooster Wu Gui's mistake, Skylark certainly didn't dare to be negligent and relax. He secretly watched the situation closely. As soon as the people left, the news came. They're gone? Haha, it's time to win a few battles to boost morale. After reading the report from the Security Bureau, Yang Chendong happily said to Beta Persei beside him, "Have you calculated the number of qualified soldiers in the past 20 days? Young Master, Tian Hu Xiaoyining and Luzhua have reported the data every day. As of last night, there are about 35,000 soldiers who can be considered veterans." Beta Persei quickly replied. It was obvious that he had learned a lot from following Yang Chendong. "Oh, this number is not low." Yang Chendong seemed surprised. He silently calculated in his heart. It turned out that they had trained nearly 2,000 soldiers every day. This was the benefit of actual combat. Survival of the fittest. War had the final say. Facts had the final say. In between life and death, people's potential could often be maximized. With that in mind, Yang Chendong opened his mouth again. "Since it's like this, inform the 3 division commanders. They can adopt the strategy of the old leading the new. Out of the 2,000 men, they can choose 500 old soldiers to lead 1,500 new soldiers. And if the old soldiers have outstanding performance, they can be gathered together, and according to their performance, this young master will promote them, and according to their performance, we can decide if they will enter the A-grade army or B-grade army, and they can be the best candidates for the various divisions." Chapter 1043. After 20 days of training, there were finally results. Beta Persei also agreed happily. And it was from this day onwards that the situation on the battlefield began to change subtly. Similarly, the enemy was no longer defeated by the five-star army after encountering each other. Sometimes they could even fight to a draw, and occasionally, they could even turn defeat into victory. At first, the Siamese army did not feel anything about the changes on the battlefield. When someone reported the situation to his superior, the general did not take it seriously. He thought that it must be his soldiers who were slacking off. That was why they praised the enemy so highly. For this reason, the general even scolded a few of the informants. He suppressed the informants with the authority of a superior officer. Suppressing the gourd would lead to the emergence of the ladle. Suppressing some matters by force might not necessarily lead to a good outcome. What was more frightening was that on the battlefield, if you underestimated your opponent, there would only be one outcome: death or defeat. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed. More and more ambitious young men under the Yangtze forces came to the battlefield. More and more people began to participate in the battle, and displayed their advantages. As the number of actual combat increased, many men with excellent results were reflected. Among them, the number of people who were promoted by Yang Chendong alone exceeded 5,000. All of them had been tested in actual combat. They had participated in more than 20 battles, both large and small. Among them, the weakest one had accumulated 20 kills on the battlefield. With the demonstration of these 5,000 young men, the young men of the other races were greatly stimulated. They performed even more bravely and fiercely on the battlefield, strengthening the transition from new recruits to old soldiers, and also increasing the proportion of old soldiers. At one point, the number of old soldiers had reached over 60,000. The 5-star army had achieved such great results. The Siamese army felt it the most. They had originally prepared 120,000 people, all of whom were trained soldiers. But now the number of people was less than 50,000. Seeing that the 5-star army's offensive did not weaken and was still so strong, they had no choice but to send a request for reinforcements to the capital. It wasn't that they couldn't defeat the 5-star army, and it wasn't that they didn't fight with their lives on the line. It was just that there were too many of them, so many that it seemed like they would never be able to kill them. In fact, the 5-star army had paid a heavy price. Countless recruits had died in the first battle. In terms of numbers, they were not inferior to the Siamese army. Manga City suddenly received a request for reinforcements from the East Army, which was beyond the king's expectations. Didn't they say that the battle at the front lines was going well, and that the 5-star army had suffered heavy losses, and that they wouldn't be able to hold on if this continued? Why was it his own side that needed reinforcements? What kind of situation was this? Countless question marks involuntarily appeared in his mind. Ilikui immediately summoned Prime Minister Hammond and first-ranked General Chun Hong to seek their opinions. The two representatives of the civil and military officials hurried into the palace. Just as they were confused, Ilikui threw an urgent letter for help at their feet with an unfriendly expression. "Take a look and see what's going on." The two picked up the letter, and their expressions quickly turned heavy. Chun Hong was the only first-ranked general in the palace. In fact, he had been in charge of military affairs and understood the situation at the front lines very well. Indeed, the news of victory had been constantly spreading. As time passed, he had already gotten used to it. He wouldn't become so excited because of the news of victory. In fact, in his opinion, this battle should be over soon. Perhaps, it would be worth celebrating when they achieved a great victory over the 5-star army. Needless to say, Hammond personally understood the situation at the front lines. 10 days ago, the news of victory was still spreading. Why did they need to request reinforcements from the royal capital so quickly? Could it be that the 5-star army's reinforcements had arrived? When he thought of this, Hammond suddenly remembered something. The intelligence personnel he sent to investigate the 5-star army hadn't contacted him for 7 to 8 days. Logically speaking, if there was any situation, they should have contacted him at least once every 3 to 5 days. But this time it was so long. Did something happen to them? What did this mean? The faces of the two ministers became heavy. However, without enough understanding, how could they know what to say at this moment? He was facing the king. One wrong word, one wrong decision, and it could bring about terrible consequences. The two didn't speak, but it didn't mean that the matter would pass. Looking at the two who had turned mute, Ilikui's displeased voice sounded again. "What? Why aren't you speaking? This king is asking for your opinion." Ilikui was about to get angry. Chun Hong was afraid and couldn't help but raise his head and say, "Your Majesty, perhaps the 5-star army sent reinforcements. After all, the battle has been going on for almost a month, and the battles are fierce every day. The soldiers at the front lines must be exhausted and need fresh blood to ensure victory." Exhausted? So in your opinion, are you going to agree to send reinforcements? Ilikui heard this ambiguous answer and asked in displeasure. According to the rules of the battlefield, the soldiers can't be used frequently. We should send reinforcements. Chun Hong knew that he couldn't continue wavering. He could only grit his teeth and express his determination. After Chun Hong expressed his opinion, it was naturally Hammond's turn. Logically speaking, he had lost the support of his informants and should first understand the situation before making a final decision. But this time, Ilikui was in a fit of rage. If he gave such an answer, it was clearly inappropriate. During this period of time, Chun Hong had been active in the royal city. He had already roped in a lot of ministers, and had also said a lot of bad things about himself. At this moment, he absolutely could not do anything wrong. Otherwise, it would be like handing over his weakness to his opponent. "Your Majesty, this official also believes that we should send reinforcements. But the matters at the front lines shouldn't be too urgent. Your Majesty should also take care of your body." After coming to a decision, Hammond's expression relaxed and he replied fluently, Hearing Hammond's tone wasn't heavy and even seemed to be relaxed, Eliqui's heart was greatly reassured. He knew his prime minister too well. He had always planned before acting. Since he said it was fine, then there shouldn't be much to worry about. But before Eliqui could speak, Chun Hong, who saw him as a thorn in his side, took the initiative to express his opinion. Prime Minister, how can you be so sure that there won't be any problems? First, there was a light chuckle. Then, the confident Hammond said with confidence, there are 3 reasons. First, General Dong Dong sent an urgent message of 300 miles. If the matter is urgent, he should send an urgent message of 800 miles. Second, General Gordon of the Northern Army hasn't sent a signal for reinforcements. It can be seen that even if the 5-star army sent reinforcements, the scale is limited and can only support one side of the battle. Third, the location of the battle is within Siam. Compared to transporting supplies and fodder, we have a shorter distance and faster speed. Even if we compare the expenditure, the 5-star army won't be able to afford it. When the 3 points were mentioned, Ha Chunwang shut his mouth. He knew that he wasn't a match for a scholar in terms of eloquence. Moreover, this was the representative of scholars, Hammond. Hearing this, King Eliqui was very happy. Good, as expected of my prime minister. What you said is reasonable. Even if the 5-star army sent reinforcements, we should also send reinforcements. This time, we will let them see the strength of Siam, and let them know that we aren't comparable to Lansong and Golden Rim. We, Siam, are the strongest and cannot be defeated. Following Eliqui's laughter, the matter of sending reinforcements to the Eastern Army was settled. In order to deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army, they sent out 100,000 reinforcements. At this point, Siam's original 800,000 troops had been sent out to 500,000, more than half of the original force. The scholar and military left the palace. Ha Chunwang snorted and rolled his eyes before leaving Hammond behind. He didn't bicker with him because he still had many things to do. For example, sending out intelligence agents to investigate the situation at the front lines and find out where the previous intelligence agents had gone. For example, it was time to have a discussion with Madali. In his eyes, this was a war where both sides would suffer losses. The sooner they stopped fighting, the sooner both sides would benefit. And so, in the diplomatic mission's courtyard after 25 days, almost a month, Madali finally met with Hammond once again. Haha, Prime Minister, you are so busy. Upon meeting, Madali mocked the other party. Speaking of which, he couldn't be blamed for being so angry. After being ignored for almost a month, anyone would be angry. Before coming, Hammond had already expected Yang Xie's special envoy to be unhappy. He immediately cupped his fist and said, my apologies, my sincere apologies. There was a small problem at the front lines. I just finished dealing with it. The first thing I did after returning is to see you. Oh, a small problem at the front lines? What's the matter? Through the interpreter, Madali pretended to understand and asked. At first he looked pained. Then Hammond raised his head and said, isn't it because there are too many captives at the front lines? My king is benevolent and has sent these captives back to the royal capital. There are so many people who need to eat, so I, as the prime minister, have to take care of them. That is why I have neglected you. Please forgive me. As Hammond spoke, he paid attention to Madali's reaction. He wanted to see something from this person's expression. But he didn't know that he didn't understand Madali at all. Specifically, there were 3 things he didn't understand. First, as Yang Xie's foreign minister, Madali's ability to communicate with people was outstanding. He was also the best at reading people's expressions. Any small mistake made by an opponent could be caught and analyzed. So it was better to forget about playing mind games with such a person. It would be good enough if he didn't fall for other schemes. Chapter 1044. Secondly, Madali understood Siamese. After diligently studying for the past 20 days, he could be considered proficient. This gave him more room to think and react. On the surface, it seemed like he still needed to listen to the interpreter, but in reality, he already knew the specifics and had already begun to react. Thirdly, and the most important one, this time, The diplomatic mission was equipped with a telegraph. This meant that whenever he needed to know about anything that happened on the front lines, Yang Chendong would report it to him, allowing him to understand the battle situation and Yang Chendong's thoughts so that he could determine the next step. All of this had been carried out in secret. On the surface, it seemed like the 100-odd members of the diplomatic mission hadn't left the courtyard, but they were well aware of the situation outside. As for the specific changes on the battlefield, he had even learned of them a few days earlier than Hammond. With these three advantages, if Hammond still wanted to play tricks and schemes with Maudali, wouldn't that be asking for humiliation? It was clearly victory that had turned into defeat. Yet Maudali was still pretending to be the victor in front of him. Hearing this, Maudali sneered in his heart, but pretended to be extremely shocked, as if he was panicking. What? Sir Minister said the 5-star army suffered a great defeat on the front lines? That's impossible, impossible. Our reinforcements will arrive soon, although they are untrained civilians. At this point, Maudali suddenly shut his mouth, and with an awkward expression, he took a sip of water from the cup in front of him. It seemed like he did it in a moment of desperation, but it was actually for Hammond to hear. The crux of the matter was how he said it to the other party, and how much of it the other party would believe. From the looks of it, his goal should be achieved. Indeed, he had achieved his goal. Maudali's performance was too realistic, and in addition to this sudden question, people would often involuntarily answer the most realistic situation. More importantly, Hammond was certain that Maudali didn't know what had happened on the front lines, so he didn't have time to lie to the 5-star army. Of course, the most important point was that the result of his analysis was that the 5-star army had reinforcements. Maudali's answer coincided with his own inference. However, he did not expect that the reinforcements would be untrained civilians. If all of this was true, Siam only needed to block the attacks of the 5-star army to turn the tables and regain control of the battle. Immensely excited by this sudden news, Hammond suppressed his decision to negotiate with Maudali. He only expressed his concern for food and accommodation, saying that since they were in Bangkok, they were guests. If there was anything they needed, they could ask at any time. Following that, Hammond left with an anxious expression. He was indeed a little anxious. He needed to report the situation to the king, and then reconsider how many reinforcements to send. In the Siamese palace, King Yaliki was overjoyed when he heard Hamad's report. So, the 5-star army did send reinforcements, and it should have been discussed beforehand. It's just that they have no reinforcements to send, so they sent some civilians? Yes. This special envoy has been out for more than a month. Naturally, he wouldn't be clear about the situation on the battlefield. The fact that he mentioned reinforcements should be the policy that the 5-star army agreed on before he came. Haha, congratulations, Your Majesty. The 5-star army has sent out all of their elites, and now they even need to send in civilians. Facing these untrained people, apart from their numbers, there is nothing to be afraid of. Hammond bowed and congratulated. This caused Hammond to burst out in laughter. Haha, good. Lord Prime Minister, you've handled this matter well. Now that we know the truth about the 5-star army, in your opinion, how should we deal with them? Your Majesty, I believe that the enemy's only advantage is their numbers. If we can dispatch more soldiers to join the battle and create an unstoppable momentum, I believe victory won't be too difficult. Hammond, who had already come up with a plan on the way here, said excitedly. Oh, ministers will means to continue to send in reinforcements? Ilichi roughly understood the meaning behind these words. Yes, continue to send in reinforcements. As long as we can defeat the 5-star army, victory will not be difficult. We can even use this opportunity to expand the territory of our Siam kingdom. Hammond, who was brimming with confidence, had a smile and excitement on his face. Ilichi had always valued Hammond's ability. After hearing his analysis, Ilichi felt that it was reasonable. He nodded and said, "There are still 300,000 soldiers in the capital waiting to be deployed. In your opinion, what should we do?" Forgive me for being so bold, but Your Majesty, please show your courage and only leave 100,000 behind. Send 100,000 reinforcements to the north and east respectively. Attack with an overwhelming advantage and completely frighten the 5-star army. Strike their morale, and this battle will determine the outcome. Right, since we have sent out so many reinforcements, the battle strategy must be changed. We can't just send out 2,000 people at a time to engage the enemy in guerrilla warfare. We should gather them together to achieve a deterrent effect. Good. Then we will immediately convene a court meeting to hear the opinions of the officials. Seeing that Hammond's words were reasonable, Ilichi had already agreed to 70% of it. The so-called meeting of the officials was just to discuss some specific matters. The king had already agreed in his heart, and the minister was also in full agreement. Naturally, no one in the court meeting would be blind enough to stop them. Even though Chun Hong wasn't happy that Hammond had stolen the limelight, he could only watch hatefully from the sidelines. After sending 100,000 reinforcements to the east, the capital sent another 100,000 to the north and east respectively. At this point, Siam Kingdom had sent out 700,000 of its 800,000 regular soldiers. It was not an exaggeration to call it a war of the entire country. Since Siam Kingdom sent reinforcements, Qingxi, who had been left in Bangkok, sent the news through the radio. Yang Chendong was also very happy when he heard the news. Siam Kingdom also sent a large army to their deaths. It was like someone giving him a pillow when he was sleepy. Pass down the order. Tian Hu and the others are to come to the main tent for a meeting. The main force of Siam Kingdom's army was finally sent out. This gave Yang Chendong the opportunity to defeat them one by one. This was also one of his plans. Otherwise, with the 800,000 Siam Kingdom's army gathered together, Yang Xie's army might not have the strength to do so. Yang Chendong called Tian Hu and the others over, and informed them of the Siamese army's movements. Yang Chendong then asked them to change their tactics. Since there were so many enemies, they would not play a game of 2,000 against 2,000. But to say 100,000 against 100,000 was not Yang Chendong's intention. The so-called excellent commanders on the battlefield had to think of ways to take the initiative, and then guide the situation of the battlefield to develop as they wished. Yang Chendong was undoubtedly an excellent commander, so he made the decision to change the battle from 2,000 to 5,000 people. At the same time, he also made a tactical decision to retreat when necessary, lure the enemy to chase, and then force the enemy to split up. To put it bluntly, if the enemy's forces were relatively concentrated, then retreat. There was no rush to fight the enemy. When the enemy began to split up, then look for an opportunity to fight. It was like eating rice, one bite at a time. The tactical plan was decided, and the next step was to execute it. There were still some days before the main force of Siam Kingdom's reinforcements arrived. This was the time the 5-star army had to prepare. It could be said that there was plenty of time. It had been more than 2 months since the battle with Siam Kingdom, and this was one of the few times Yang Chendong fought a battle. Looking at the past, Yang Chendong preferred to use the method of cutting the Gordian, not when destroying a force or a country. For example, when he attacked North Korea, he did it in a spurt of energy and did not give the enemy any time to react. When he attacked the Phnom Penh Dynasty, which was now Cambodia, it only took him 31 days from the first shot to the end. The reason for this result was that 1, he was well prepared, and 2, he had sufficient military strength. But this time the well-prepared side was Siam. They first made all the plans, then they began the attack with 800,000 soldiers. They caught Yang Xie off guard, and the time limit of the battle was constantly extended. Fortunately, Yang Chendong finally controlled the rhythm of the battle. Next, it was time to watch the performance of the 5-star army. Siam Kingdom's reinforcements began to appear on the battlefield. First, they gathered in the eastern border city of Siam Kingdom. Then, in an echelon of 50,000 soldiers, a total of 550,000 soldiers went out of the city and pressed against the 5-star army. The 5-star army, which had been prepared for a long time, immediately began to withdraw their forces. They kept retreating, showing that they did not dare to fight. In order to attract the enemy's attention and find a suitable opportunity to attack, they retreated back to Cambodia. In the beginning, some people were worried that if they retreated from Siam Kingdom, the Siam Kingdom's army of 250,000 soldiers would continue to pursue them. In the face of such worries, Yang Chendong gave a very positive answer. A greedy person would never be satisfied. Look, the Siam kingdom would not stop advancing because of their retreat. After all, they were the ones who launched the first attack. Their intention to expand was very clear. The fact was as Yang Chendong expected. When the five-star army retreated from Siam kingdom and returned to Bob, the border city of Cambodia, the Siam kingdom's army crossed the border and chased after them. Obviously, the arrival of the 200,000 reinforcements boosted the morale of some people. They wanted to make a big contribution. Chapter 1045. Since that was the case, Yang Chendong had no choice but to fulfill their wish. In order to inflict heavy damage to the Siamese army, Yang Chendong made two decisions. First, lure the enemy deep into their territory. Second, strengthen the defense and clear the field. He wanted to lure the greedy Siamese army into his territory, and then look for an opportunity to attack. At the same time, he would not leave anything useful for the enemy. He would force the enemy to transport food from a long distance, and then attack them. When it came to strengthening the defense and clearing the field, the party carrying out the plan would have to pay a price. The loss would be to the benefit of the people. Fortunately, the Siamese army had previously passed through these towns and cities. Along the way, they had burned, killed, and looted. The people had already suffered a disaster, and had nothing valuable in their hands. This made the strengthening of the defense and clearing of the field much easier. The 250,000 Siamese soldiers continued to march forward, singing songs of victory. They were arrogant as they passed through Bob, Siam, Angkor, and other places. They followed the edge of the Tunnel Sai River into the depths of Cambodia. When the news reached Bangkok, King Ilichi was very happy. He did not expect the seemingly powerful five-star army to be so weak. He was glad that he had listened to Hamad and sent a large number of reinforcements. Otherwise, he would have been intimidated by the five-star army. Ilichi was in a good mood. Even the people of Siam felt good about themselves. When the streets and alleys were filled with news of the victories of the frontline soldiers, the people were overjoyed. Some of them even went to the compound of the diplomatic mission to express their excitement. They tried to enter the compound and parade Madali and the others to the public. After all, this was the relay station of the Siamese ambassadors. The Siamese soldiers guarding this place would not allow ordinary people to enter. However, as more and more people gathered nearby, they finally could not withstand the pressure, and sent someone to report to Hamad. When two armies were at war, they would not kill the ambassadors. Moreover, the Siamese army had not achieved the final victory. On the battlefield, the situation was ever-changing. If the ambassadors sent by the five-star army were killed, the two sides would have to fight to the death. Seeing this, Hammond arrived outside the diplomatic mission's compound and brought 1,000 soldiers with him to protect the place. Logically speaking, this was the most normal action and even something within his duty. But when all of this fell into the eyes of the first-rank General Chun Hong, who had always wanted to cause trouble, he saw an opportunity. Under his instigation, news quickly spread through the streets of the royal capital. Prime Minister Hammond had long been on good terms with the five-star army. This time, he even risked defending the citizens to ensure the safety of the five-star army's emissary. There was no smoke without fire. Many untrue things were often controlled by rumors and eventually became facts in people's eyes. Hamad advocated for the use of a large number of reinforcements, which won the king's praise, especially his advocacy of large-scale operations, not giving the five-star army a chance to defeat them one by one, which allowed the army to continuously occupy large areas of Cambodia. All of these were contributions, and they were the cause and effect of envy, jealousy, and hatred in the eyes of others. When one person's contributions were too great, it would attract the dissatisfaction of others. At this moment, Hammond was like this. Originally, as the Prime Minister, he was the leader of the officials. This time, with such a great contribution, it naturally caused others to feel a sense of hatred towards a common enemy. At this time, Chun Hong made his move. With him as the leader, the officials who were implicated collectively wrote a petition to impeach Hammond, saying that he had secretly colluded with the five-star army's diplomatic mission, and did not hesitate to mobilize the Siamese army to fight against the Siamese citizens. This was the greatest provocation to the imperial power. Ilichi, who was able to lead Siam into the era of great cities, was not a foolish person. When he saw these memorials, he was not moved. Instead, he put them aside and walked towards the harem. In the harem, the most favored concubine, Chun Hwang's sister, had already received the news. When she saw the king, she naturally fawned over him and served him well. She seemed to have noticed that Iliqui's expression was not good, so she asked him about the reason. The king was also a human, and similarly, he had his own happiness and worries. Some things were not suitable for him to tell his subordinates, so the person next to him became the target of his venting. Therefore, he told the king about the impeachment of Hammond. His beloved concubine, who was already prepared, was not willing to let go of the opportunity to speak. She said, seemingly intentionally or unintentionally, "The king need not worry, the prime minister has done many things for the country. His contributions have already spread throughout the harem, and there are even people who say, when one stopped speaking, it often had a different effect. For example, when his beloved concubine suddenly stopped speaking, it was rather suspenseful, and it successfully attracted Hammond's attention." What did people say? This I dare not say. Her face was filled with fear. It had to be said that her talent was wasted if she did not go into acting. "It's fine, I forgive you. Speak." The more she acted like this, the more Iliqui wanted to know what was going on. Completely forced, his beloved concubine said, "My subordinates said that the prime minister's contributions are great. If not for him, Siam would be in danger. If not for him, Siam would have been defeated by the 5-star army. Such a person is definitely a wise man, a great contributor." Enough. Without waiting for his beloved concubine to finish speaking, Iliqui's face was filled with anger. As a king, he was wary of his subordinates' incompetence and uselessness, but he was even more wary of his subordinates' abilities. Otherwise, why would there be a saying, "The most meritorious man is the town lord"? According to what his beloved concubine said, it seemed that Siam's achievements today were all due to Xianggua's efforts. Even he, the monarch, could not compare to him. How could this not anger Iliqui, who had always been confident and had a strong sense of self-esteem? He had to admit that Hammond was very capable, so much so that he could entrust him with many things without worry. However, when he did everything well and even won a great reputation as the king, he had to worry about whether his subordinates' contributions were too great. Speaking of which, it was really difficult to be a subordinate. He could not do it, but he could not do it too well either. He really did not know what to do. His beloved concubine's words seemed to have nothing to say, but the words "the most meritorious man" had been deeply buried in Iliqui's heart. He was worried that some people's contributions were too great, so he had already planned to suppress them. However, Iliqui was indeed capable. He did not plan to deal with Hammond now. Instead, he wanted to wait until after the battle with the 5-star army was over. This trip to the harem was nothing more than a thorn in his heart. Hammond was unaware of all this. He continued to conscientiously carry out his duties. Even though he knew that many people were impeaching him, he did not take it seriously. Everything was because he knew that Iliqui was a wise king. He would not doubt himself because of the words of others. Therefore, he did what he should do and did not restrain himself. However, it was this confidence that brought him disaster. Yangxia Foreign Minister Madali, who knew the world's affairs without going out, was trapped in the compound and seemed to have no contact with the outside world. However, through a small radio station, the outside world could not be hidden from his eyes and ears. After receiving a telegram from the Intelligence Department's Southeast Branch, Yunk, and knowing what was happening outside, he found a Siamese person in charge of the matters here in the compound and requested to see the first-rank General Chun Hong. Chun Hong wanted to use this Yangxia diplomatic mission to harm the Prime Minister. Naturally, he would try his best to bribe anyone in the compound. This person in charge was one of those bribed. This information was found out by Yunk and the others. Naturally, Madali's request fell into Chun Hwang's ears. When he first heard the news, Chun Hong did not understand Madali's intentions. However, the more it was so, the more he felt that this meeting was necessary. He immediately decided to meet with Madali. Thus, under the arrangements of his subordinates, and without alerting the Prime Minister, he entered the diplomatic compound to meet with Madali. When they first met, Madali lowered his status and even tried to flatter Chun Hong. At first, he gave Chun Hong a good impression. The meeting was very pleasant. Madali took the opportunity to speak according to the plan. The Siamese army is invincible. Although I have been trapped here for a long time, I have not received any news from the 5-star army for a long time. Your king also has no intention of receiving us. I can imagine what will happen. In the interest of peace and friendship, he is willing to represent the 5-star army and take the initiative to negotiate. He is even willing to give half of Cambodia to Siam. He just hopes that this war will end sooner. Madali spoke with great sincerity. Chun Hong had no choice but to believe him. Since Madali was here to show goodwill, this was a good thing. He was overjoyed and said, "Very good. Your esteemed envoy is able to see the situation clearly. You are indeed a smart person. However, I wonder if your words can represent the highest level of the 5-star army?" Of course. Otherwise, wouldn't my position as an envoy become a joke? In fact, I won't hide it from the great general. When I first came here this time, I wanted to negotiate with your country, but no one listened to me. Thus, I took the initiative to look for you. I know that you are a smart person. You will definitely agree to this mutually beneficial answer. So as long as the general agrees, we can immediately do what we said. We, the 5-star army, are willing to cede our territory to Siam for the sake of our reputation. We only ask that you hand General Tong over to us, so that we can answer to the outside world. Chapter 1046. Madali finally revealed his trump card, General Tong Si. This was something he had discussed with Yang Qindong beforehand. Their instincts told them that this person would be of great use. When Tong Si was mentioned, Ha Chunwang sucked in a breath of cold air. He knew that this person was already waiting for his death in the dungeon. However, no matter what, he was still a general of Siam. If he were to hand him over to the 5-star army, what would the people outside say? He couldn't help but ask with some difficulty, "Esteemed ambassador, must you take Tong Si?" "Yes, we must. This concerns the reputation of our 5-star army. Our leader said that we must see him alive or dead," Madali said with an unquestionable tone. Oh. When he heard that, Ha Chunwang immediately had a plan in his mind. If they wanted to see the corpse, it would be easy. He could find a random excuse and say that it was Tong Si's corpse. Once the news spread and the people were dissatisfied, he could release Tong Si and let him face the truth. By then, the deal with the 5-star army would have been completed. What could they do? Thinking about it, he nodded and agreed. "All right, leave this matter to me. Esteemed ambassador, please wait for the good news." To be able to win this battle without shedding a drop of blood, and seize a large portion of the territory, this was definitely a great contribution. With an excited heart, Ha Chunwang entered the palace and met with Li Qi. He told him everything that had happened. This discussion naturally caused Li Qi to be overjoyed. He only needed to hand over one person to obtain the final victory. This made him very happy, especially when Ha Chunwang thought about how he could casually find a corpse to deal with and reap the benefits. He didn't need to take any responsibility and didn't lose the dignity of a great nation. After Ha Chunwang received the task, he immediately went to carry it out. He spent a lot of effort to get a tombstone and engraved Tong Si's name on it. After everything was settled, he personally went to the diplomatic mission's compound and invited Madali, who had been trapped the moment he arrived, to the tombstone. He pointed at the tombstone and said, "This is Tong Si's tomb. To tell you the truth, he was defeated in the war. When he returned home, our king personally gave the order to execute him." Madali sneered, then he said, "Great general, do you think that a tombstone can put an end to everything? I'm afraid there's no way to explain this." "You can open the coffin and examine the corpse," Ha Chunwang said on his behalf. "Forget it. This person has been dead for longer than I have been in Bangkok, and the weather is so hot. What else can there be other than the rancid smell after opening the coffin?" After Ma Dali finished speaking, he flicked his sleeves and left. His voice echoed in the air. Great General, since this is the case, our 5-star army will fight you on the battlefield even if we have to sacrifice ourselves. As a result, the peace talks were unable to proceed. Ha Chunwang was a little disappointed, but he returned to his daily routine. After all, there was still good news coming from the front line. Even if the peace talks failed, they would still win this battle. It was just that more people would die. Right now, his greatest desire was to get rid of Hammond. If this person was still the prime minister, he was afraid that after the war, he would have to return to the barren lands of the western frontier. This was something he could not bear. Hammond was not idle either. He had been busy recruiting new soldiers. Although there were always reports of victory coming from the front lines, there was no harm in making more preparations since the battlefield could change at any time. Under Hammond's supervision, the recruitment of new soldiers was carried out in an orderly manner. The impeachment memorials continued to be placed in front of Hammond. Although there was a thorn in his heart, this famous monarch had no intention of touching Hammond. He had already thought about it. Even if he wanted to touch Hammond, he would have to wait until the war ended. Everything would be settled with an excuse to suppress it. Using the dying Tong Si as a bargaining chip to end the war was quickly forgotten. It was as if it had never happened. The reason why no one paid attention to this matter was because they believed that the army was winning steadily. There was no need for such methods. However, as the Siamese army on the eastern front line occupied more and more empty cities and territories, they had no choice but to divide their forces to defend the cities. The Siamese army, which originally consisted of 50,000 people, finally showed signs of being scattered. Attack! The 5-star army, who had been waiting for an opportunity, saw the effect of luring the enemy deep into the enemy's territory. They decisively launched a fierce counterattack. More new soldiers entered the battlefield. Apart from the corpses left on the battlefield, those who walked out were qualified soldiers who had experienced hundreds of battles. Yang Chendong's decision was to eliminate the enemy's strength. He did not care about the gains or losses of a single city or territory. Following this principle, the 5-star army used multiple attacks to launch a full-scale counterattack against the 250,000 Siamese soldiers who had entered Cambodia. In order to achieve the goal of using war to train the soldiers, the young men from all over the country rushed in at once. They formed a unit of 5,000 people and launched a planned and intensive counterattack against the Siamese soldiers. After half a month, nearly 100,000 of the 300,000 people died. The number of injured reached 100,000. However, in the end, around 70,000 qualified soldiers were harvested. The attack of 300,000 people killed nearly 100,000 Siamese soldiers, greatly slowing down the enemy's offensive. Then the third batch of young men arrived. Another 200,000 people entered the battlefield. 10 days later, more than 50,000 people died, and more than 100,000 were injured. The number of soldiers who had experienced hundreds of battles was 50,000. In the third battle, more than 80,000 people were killed or injured. The East Siamese army still had about 70,000 people. At this point, the lack of manpower had become obvious. They had completely lost the initiative on the battlefield. Urgent letters for help were sent to the capital, Manga City. The 5-star army of the East Siamese army had sent out about 560,000 new soldiers. Nearly 200,000 people died, and more than 200,000 were injured. In the end, the number of qualified soldiers was 125,000. Perhaps they were not the best, especially the 50,000 people who came later. When they faced the Siamese army, their opponents were no longer at their peak. However, they had all experienced battles on the battlefield and had seen blood. They had a certain level of self-defense and killing ability. Give the order. 125,000 people will be divided into 13 units. We will launch a counterattack. We need better soldiers. Faced with hundreds of thousands of casualties, Yang Chendong said with a pained expression. However, they were of a different race. The deaths of these people were not as painful as the deaths of the 4,854 Lung Feng and Heiwei soldiers. With the order, the counterattack began. In the face of the veterans' counterattack, The Siamese army, which had been badly beaten, finally showed signs of weakness. Not only did they quickly abandon the captured cities, but even when they retreated back to the borders of Siam, the five-star army did not stop. They continued to attack them. Shatu City fell. The loss of Shatu City, an important city at the eastern border, meant that the Siamese army had changed from an all-out attack to an all-out retreat. It also meant that the five-star army had begun to gain the initiative on the battlefield. The loss of Shatu City caused an earthquake in Bangkok. When King Ilikui heard the news, he almost fainted. Then he summoned all the officials for a meeting. All the officials were woken up in the middle of the night and gathered in the palace. The news of the fall of Shatu City was personally reported by Ilikui. All the officials were terrified. All right, everyone is here. Let's talk about what to do next. At this moment, Ilikui's face no longer showed any signs of panic. However, it was undeniable that his expression was extremely ugly. Even with his ability to calm himself down, he was already panicking. If the king was like this, the other officials were even more so. Everyone was panicking and did not dare to raise their heads. The 250,000 soldiers were defeated just like that. Now there was less than a third of them left. Furthermore, the five-star army had entered the border. How could they turn the situation around? Seeing that no one was speaking, Ilikui could only ask, "Minister, how is the recruitment going?" "Your Majesty, the recruitment is still ongoing. Currently, there are 100,000 new soldiers entering the camp. However, they have not undergone any training. If they are forced onto the battlefield, I am afraid that most of them will not be able to withstand a single blow. They will not be of any use." Hammond raised his head and said hesitantly. He was really worried that the king would send out these 100,000 soldiers in a moment of desperation. If that was the case, it would be the same as sending these people to their deaths. Fortunately, Ilikui was not muddle-headed. He only shook his head and expressed his disappointment. If it was any other time, Ilikui's performance would have caused Chun Hong to jump out and kick Hammond while he was down. However, he lowered his head and remained silent. He suddenly thought of Madali and what he had told him about General Tong. Previously, they had considered Siam's reputation, and the fact that their army had always held the initiative on the battlefield. Hence, they did not agree to hand over the people. But now, in the face of such an unfavorable situation, he had no choice but to disregard his reputation. "Your Majesty, I have something to say. I don't know if I should say it." Seeing that the court had fallen into silence again, Chun Hong spoke up. It was rare for someone to take the initiative to speak at this time. The high and mighty Ilikui simply spat out a word, "Speak." After receiving permission, Chun Hong looked at the throne and said without blinking, "Your Majesty, do you still remember the envoy from the five-star army? He said that as long as we hand over General Tong, they will withdraw their troops and even compensate us. Of course, today is different from the past. Let's not think about compensation. However, if they can retreat, we will have enough time to train a new army and hope to rise again." Chapter 1047. Chun Hong had just opened his mouth when Prime Minister Hamad's voice rang out. "That's impossible. Tong Si is a general of Siam. If we hand him over just like that, where will our dignity go? If we do that, how will the people view us?" Hamad was a capable prime minister. Siam was able to enter the era of prosperity because of King Ili's wisdom. However, it had a lot to do with Hamad as the prime minister. Usually people like him were very proud. Now that someone wanted to trample on his pride, how could he agree? As if he had expected Hammond to object, Chun Hong quickly turned around and looked at him. "What's wrong? Does the prime minister value his reputation so much? Is reputation more important, or the strength and safety of Siam more important?" Of course they're all important. Although the situation in the East isn't looking good, we still have 100,000 veterans. Under their lead, the 200,000 new recruits might be able to make a difference. Just like the five-star army, aren't they also made up of new recruits? Hammond naturally wasn't afraid of anyone when it came to eloquence. Is that so? What if these 300,000 soldiers lose the war? "Prime Minister, What will happen to Siam? Who will protect the safety of the royal city? Chun Hong wasn't a pushover either. He had already prepared for this problem. He had even prepared for what Hamad would say. In the court, the two ministers actually quarreled openly. This made Ili, who was already in a bad mood, even more unsightly. When the country was in danger, why couldn't these people sit down and talk calmly? Would there be a good ending to a quarrel between ministers? In a fit of anger, Ili immediately showed his might and said angrily, "Enough, this isn't a small street. You aren't the lowest class of commoners. Shut up." Since the king was angry, the two naturally ended their quarrel. They both took a few steps back and returned to their positions. At this time, Ili's voice rang out. "Dignity is the foundation of a country. Of course we want it." Hamad heaved a sigh of relief. He was afraid that the king would believe Chun Chuanwang's words. If that was the case, how could a dynasty without dignity and bottom line be trusted? Unfortunately, this relief didn't last for even a breath of time. Ili's voice rang out again. "But for the safety of the country, so what if we bow our heads this time? Don't the Han people always say that a great man knows when to yield, and when not? Then we will bow our heads this time. As long as it's for the sake of Siam's future. Let's leave this matter to the general. Go see the ambassador from the 5-star army, and ask him if the previous promise is still valid." They all said but, and there was nothing good after that. Now that it had been confirmed, Minister Hammond felt a chill in his heart as he urged, "Your Majesty, you mustn't. You mustn't open your mouth. Otherwise, the hearts of the people will truly be unable to unite. That would truly be the most terrifying thing. Enough." Without waiting for Hamad to finish speaking, Ili waved his hand and said, "Prime Minister, you should worry more about the new army. How to quickly let them have a certain amount of fighting power is far more practical than talking about righteousness in court." The Prime Minister was the Prime Minister of a country. He was an existence that was second only to the king, and above tens of thousands. Many times, the Prime Minister or Prime Minister had a lot of control over the imperial power. They could even control the emperor, the king, the monarch, and everything that they could see. As the supreme leader of the imperial power, how could he be happy? It wasn't easy to conquer the country, but in the end, most of the power was given to the Prime Minister. What was the meaning of this? In the end, he was just a high-ranking employee. How could he dare to control the boss? Because of this, in the early days of the Great Ming Dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang spent a lot of effort to abolish the Prime Minister system. In the end, he concentrated power on himself. Although his workload increased, he was still happy. The Great Ming Dynasty no longer had a Prime Minister system, but Siam still had one. Moreover, Hammond was indeed a very honest person. He had a lot of autonomy in certain matters, and even the king had to act according to his mood in certain matters. The reason for such a situation was none other than the fact that this person was very capable and could help him in many things. This made him willingly give up power for his own benefit. But now Hamad's actions were very different from his own. It already involved the safety of the country. He finally couldn't bear it anymore. In addition, Chun Hong had contacted so many people to impeach Hamad. At this moment, all of his anger exploded and he told Ili to shut up. Ever since Siam became a powerful city, Ilichi had never spoken to him so forcefully. At this moment, Hamad was stunned. He realized that he didn't completely understand the king. Chun Hong saw that Ili was deflated and was very happy. He immediately cupped his fist and said, "This subject obeys your Majesty's orders. Please listen to this subject's good news." Hamad was actually scolded in court. This was the first time this had happened. At this moment, the other courtiers who were originally flattering him began to deliberately distance themselves from him. Perhaps this was the true nature of human nature. There would always be more people who hit a man when he was down, and fewer people who helped him when he was down. Ilichi walked out of the palace alone. Compared to his colleagues who took the initiative to distance themselves from him, this didn't make him sad. It was nothing more than showing him the cold and warm side of human nature. What really made him sad was the king's attitude and the other subjects' speechlessness. He couldn't imagine a country that didn't even have dignity. What kind of future could they talk about? Chun Hong, on the other hand, went to the diplomatic group's compound with a face full of joy. When he talked about Tong Si, Ma Dali's face was still filled with determination. That's right. As long as you hand over Tong Si for us to deal with, the 5-star army will retreat and discuss compensation with you. Esteemed envoy, you are too polite. What compensation? We are all neighboring countries, so we should get along well with each other. How about this? I will go ask His Majesty to bring Tong Si over for you to deal with. At this moment, Ha Chunwang didn't dare to talk about compensation. In his opinion, if the 5-star army could retreat immediately, he could accept some compensation. However, he didn't know that Ma Dali already knew that Tong Si had been taken away by the intelligence department. This promise was impossible to fulfill. Under such conditions, he could say anything he wanted. Ha Chunwang met the king for the sake of profit. Soon, he received a decree and went straight to the death row prison. Here, he interrogated Tong Si, who was imprisoned and awaiting death. Then, he was surprised to find that the person he saw wasn't Tong Si at all, but someone he had never seen before. What's going on? What's going on? Ha Chunwang roared as he called the jailer over and asked like a madman. I don't know. This person was sent here by the Prime Minister. As for who he is, we don't know. The jailer sold out the Prime Minister in order to cut ties. Hearing that it was all Hammond's doing, Chun Hawang's face revealed a sinister expression. He turned around and went back to the palace. In the palace, Ili Chi had placed all his hopes on handing over Tong Si. Suddenly, Ha Chunwang reported that the person in the death row prison wasn't Tong Si, but someone else. Ili Chi immediately sat on the throne and was speechless for a long time. The situation had changed too quickly. It was so fast that he couldn't react in time. How did Tong Si disappear? Your Majesty, it must be Hammond's doing. I said before that this person is suspected of being in cahoots with the 5-star army. With this opportunity, Chun Hong obviously wanted to add insult to injury. This isn't possible. Ili Chi shook his head. He still didn't believe it. That was the Prime Minister he personally conferred. How could he betray him? Your Majesty, regardless of whether it is true or not, I will know once I capture him and interrogate him. However, the Prime Minister has always been very cunning. I'm afraid we won't be able to get anything out of him using normal methods. We can only be a little more ruthless. Your Majesty, please agree. Ha Chunwang clenched his teeth and said. Ili Chi had no choice but to agree. He understood Hammond very well. If this was really his doing, it would be impossible to calmly interrogate him about Tong Si's whereabouts. As such, he could only use some special methods. At the Prime Minister's residence, a group of Siamese soldiers suddenly appeared and took Hammond away without any warning. Ha Chunwang had never wanted to keep a low profile. He even wanted to use this matter to strike a blow. Many people saw the Prime Minister's prestige during the arrest. Not long after, a rumor spread through the streets that the Siamese army had admitted defeat to the 5-star army. They had decided to compromise and betray their dignity by giving their general Tong Si to the 5-star army to curry favor. It was precisely because the Prime Minister did not agree with this suggestion that he was captured. The news was naturally spread by Qingxi, a CIA intelligence agent who had been staying in the city. All of this was Yang Qindong's orders. In his opinion, there was no crisis that had a greater impact than a civil strife. Wasn't it said that even the strongest fortress was afraid of being breached from the inside? Hammond's arrest naturally caused chaos in the royal capital. When Ili Chi learned of this matter, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. He hated Ha Chunwang for not knowing his limits. Why did he have to be so brazen when arresting someone? He hated those who spread the news. Wasn't this destroying his own foundation? Chapter 1048. However, everything was already a fact. Since his request for the 5-star army to negotiate had already been made public, there was no need for him to hide anymore. He just needed to find Tong Si and hand him over to resolve this crisis. Speaking of Yi Liqui, he had underestimated the position of the Prime Minister in the hearts of the people. This Prime Minister had the reputation of loving the people like his own children. In addition, with the CIA secretly adding fuel to the fire, it didn't take long before voices of support for Hamad appeared in Bangkok. These voices grew louder and louder. There were even groups of people who went to the various government offices and the palace to petition. The general idea was that they refused to lower their heads and wanted the prime minister to be returned to them. The sudden appearance of this unexpected wave and the number of people who participated increased. Ilikui was finally a little afraid. He wasn't afraid that the people would do anything to threaten him. In his view, as long as he mobilized the army, the people were in existence that could be suppressed at will. He was afraid that the prime minister's influence was so great. Fortunately, he had been captured. If he had waited for the prime minister to make the first move, with this person's rallying power, it would be hard to say if he would be able to keep his throne. The people's petition not only failed to save the prime minister, but it also made the king even more worried. There was no other way. It was always a taboo for the king to be too powerful. It could be seen that even if Hamad survived this crisis, he wouldn't be put in an important position after he was released. On the front line of the East Army, Yang Qindong led the Lu 5th Division, the 1st Cavalry Division, and the 1st Cavalry Division of the new army. They slowly followed behind the hundreds of thousands of veterans. Step by step, they moved towards the inner borders of Siam and towards Bangkok. Siam wasn't like the other countries and regions that had been conquered before. It was at the peak of the era of big cities. Whether it was the morale of the army or the people, it could be used greatly. It truly had the foundation to contend against the five-star army. If Yang Qindong had not changed his strategy at the critical moment, it would have been difficult for him to defeat the Siamese army, which was large in number and high in morale. Even now, after the war, Yang Qindong had hundreds of thousands of veterans under his command. However, he still dared not say that he could conquer Siam like he did with the other countries. After all, the hearts of the people were leaning towards benefits. This could be seen from the way the people looked at the army wherever they went. Regarding this, Yang Qindong felt wronged. So, it's natural for the Siamese army to attack Cambodia. Is it an invasion when we retaliate? Why is there always a double standard? Faced with the resistance of the local people, any other person would have to consider whether to sit down and negotiate for benefits. Just like the Japanese army that invaded China, when faced with the resistance of the Chinese people, they could only use the slogan of mutual prosperity to manage the situation. They would never dare to use force to suppress the Chinese people. However, when it came to Yang Qindong, he had already made up his mind. He remembered the words of a great man. You should chase after the enemy with courage. Don't learn from the overlord for the sake of fame. The Siamese army could suddenly attack this time. If they let it go, who could guarantee that they would not attack again? He was no longer the one nation of the past. He had already occupied several provinces, especially the newly built Far Eastern province. It was a vast land with abundant resources, and it needed a large number of people to fill it. At most, he could just emigrate the people there. In short, this time, he was ready to destroy Siam, even if he had to pay a high price for it. He had already ordered the governor of Chigang City, as well as the other provinces, to immediately prepare for the migration of the people. In fact, Cambodia, as the nearest province, had already done so. Every time the five-star army occupied a city or a place, they would arrange for these people to settle down there. As for the natives who were originally here, they would be taken away and sent to other provinces and places like the Far Eastern continent on ships. Yang Qindong's plan was to nibble away at Siam, step by step, including every inch of land and every single person in the country. Because of this, the speed of the army was very slow. Even so, it was already October, and the army led by Yang Qindong was less than 300 miles away from Bangkok. More than half a year had passed. This war could be said to be long. It took at least 31 days to defeat the Phnom Penh dynasty and conquer it. In the matter of Siam, he was determined to put in a lot of effort. Manpower, material resources, and financial resources had also been paid correspondingly. The direct result was that Lord Yu Qian and the other provincial heads couldn't help but complain. Fortunately, Yang Qindong said that there would be no move to destroy the country in a short time, and they would be given some time to develop, which blocked the leisurely mouths of the masses. In the end, the lack of population and the lack of resources was a big problem. Yangtze's development time was too short, and the speed of expanding the territory was too fast. This was the so-called pain and happiness. Compared to the 5-star army, the nobles in Bangkok had long been in a mess. The loss of the peripheral towns one after another was like a giant beast opening its mouth, giving them a gloomy and terrifying feeling. No one liked war. Even if there were some who liked it due to various reasons, they definitely did not like the feeling of being attacked at their doorstep. Facing the defeat of the East Army, especially the news from the North Army, even though the commander there was Siam's rank 1 General Gordon, who was also the best at fighting, it was useless. In the face of the endless stream of men under Yangtze's influence, their military strength was no longer at an advantage. On the contrary, they were at a disadvantage. In such an environment, no one could hold on for too long. In the palace, Siam's King Ilichi was finally impatient. He called Chun Hong over and asked, "He still hasn't told us where he hid Tong Si?" "No, he only said that he doesn't know." Chun Hong carefully raised his head. There was no other way. He was a little guilty. Originally, he thought that after capturing Hammond, he would only need to use a few tricks to get him to confess everything. However, there would always be someone who was stubborn, and he happened to meet him. 20 days had already passed, and there was still no progress. He didn't even get a single word of confession. All he got was the contemptuous sneer in the other party's eyes. Hearing that Xiangwa still hadn't confessed anything, King Ilichi said angrily, "What does he want? Does he want to see Siam destroyed?" "Your Majesty." Chun Hong comforted the king when he saw how angry the king was. At the same time, he suggested in a low voice, "Your Majesty, it seems like it's impossible for him to say anything. Should we make other preparations?" "Other preparations? Let's hear them." Knowing that there was a hidden meaning in his words, Ilichi looked like he wanted to try. Ahem. Chun Hong coughed lightly to show his awkwardness. He then said, "Why don't we find someone who looks like Tong Si and hand him over to the 5-star army? Maybe we can get away with it." An imposter? When he saw Chun Hawang's unnatural expression, Ilichi knew that Chun Hong wouldn't have any good ideas. Now that he heard this, his face showed an expression of as expected. If it was in the past, he definitely wouldn't have agreed. But now he was speechless. Should he reprimand her? Indeed, this move was quite despicable, especially when it involved the war between two countries. It was even more of a joke. If it was in the past, he would never have used it. But what should he do now? Seeing that the 5-star army was winning every step of the way, Siam's crisis was getting bigger and bigger. If they didn't think of a solution soon, they might really be in danger of being destroyed. At such a time of crisis, all kinds of tricks could be used. "How confident are you?" Instead of objecting, he asked about the feasibility of the matter. Chun Hong raised his head in surprise. When he saw Ilichi's serious face, he knew that there was a chance of success. He immediately replied, "It shouldn't be difficult to find someone who looks like Tong Si. It's just like how we look at the Han people. I think they look the same to us. So I'm 70% confident." 70% is not low. Ilichi pondered for a moment and said. Then, as if he thought of something, he said, "Do it carefully. If it doesn't work, remember that it's your own problem. It has nothing to do with me or Siam." "Yes, yes." Chun Hong nodded repeatedly. This result was already within his expectations, but he didn't find it strange. It was not because of other reasons. This was originally a very dirty matter. If something really went wrong, someone had to be the scapegoat. Chun Hong left. He had already found a replacement. After promising Ilichi's family a lot of benefits, he deliberately made him look very disheveled. This was to make people not want to see him. This would increase the probability of success. After everything was done, Chun Hong appeared in the diplomatic mission's courtyard. Tong Si was brought in. When Ma Dali heard the news, he was shocked at first. Then he laughed softly. He had already thought of Siam's plan. After all, if he were to put himself in their shoes, this might be the only solution. He pretended to be very happy as he walked out of the room. Then he saw Chun Hong close by with a flattering smile on his face. Speaking of which, this person wasn't like this a month ago. Following the 5-star Army's successive victories in the war, this person's noble head finally lowered. Ma Dali, who was well aware of all this, maintained his usual smile. He still needed Chun Hong to put on a show. He couldn't ruin their relationship. Chapter 1049. General Chun is here. My apologies for not going out to meet you. Ma Dali pretended to be very happy and took the initiative to greet him. Chun Hong was also full of smiles. When he saw Ma Dali, he pretended to be mysterious and said, "Minister Ma, look who I have brought." This was the first time Chun Hong had addressed Ma Dali by his official position. Just from this point alone, it was clear that their intelligence department had done something. Ma Dali himself was not surprised by this title. From the day he entered Bangkok, he had already disregarded his life and death. With the 5-star Army's continuous victories, he knew that he would not die unless the higher-ups of Siam had lost their minds. Unless they wanted to die together with him, saving his life was equivalent to saving their lives. "Oh, I wonder what good news General Chun has brought?" Ma Dali asked without changing his expression. Chun Hong secretly admired Ma Dali's ability to maintain his composure. He went straight to the point. "Come bring him here." "He is Tong Si?" "Yes. He is indeed tall and mighty." "Haha, General Chun is very considerate. I will immediately send someone to report this matter to the higher-ups. If there are no accidents, the war should stop now." After the fake Tong Si was brought out, there was a simple conversation. Then Ma Dali made a promise. Chun Hong was naturally overjoyed. While nodding, he almost urged Ma Dali to write a letter quickly. Ma Dali was a man of his word. He quickly wrote a letter and handed it to his trusted subordinates. Under the protection of Chun Hawang's men, he left the city. 4 days later, the news of a ceasefire came from the front line. This caused all the officials and nobles in Bangkok to celebrate. The war was finally going to stop. They did not have to worry about their lives and the safety of their property. How could they know that the reason why the 5-star Army had stopped their attack was because they were preparing for the next step of the attack? Ma Dali had already sent a telegram to inform the higher-ups of the situation. Fortunately, he brought enough spare batteries with him when he went out this time. Otherwise, he might not be able to hold on with such frequent power supply. Yang Chendong knew that the other party had used impersonation to create a fake General Tong, so he decided to beat them at their own game. He wanted to use this to weaken the morale of Siam's resistance. Compared to their previous opponents, Siam could only be described as powerful. At the very least, this country had just passed the period of being a major city. It was the time when the country was strong and the people were rich. The people were very confident in the country. This would definitely increase the difficulty of their attack. It wasn't impossible to use brute force to suppress them, but it would come at a great price. On the other hand, if they could make the other party self-destruct, then the effect would be much better. Impersonating Tong Si was one of the methods to disintegrate the enemy. Yang Chendong had already thought about how to make use of this matter. However, he was 300 miles away, and many things were beyond his reach. Everything depended on the cooperation between Ma Dali and the CIA. As for himself, this was a good opportunity to reorganize the military's morale and prepare for a bigger war. Being able to defeat Siam was completely different from dealing with other small countries in the past. In the past, the strategy was to gather the elite forces and force a breakthrough, catching the other party off guard. Then the main force would charge straight in. Before the other party could react, everything would be over. In the battle with Siam, they were the ones who took the initiative. They were in a passive position. In addition, the other party was already prepared. It was impossible to use the old strategy. That was why the war lasted for such a long time. Roughly calculating, Yang Xie's side had invested millions of new recruits in the north and east. The number of people who invested in the use of resources was even more, reaching more than 2 million. It was really not easy to achieve the current success with such a large amount of manpower and financial resources. However, this was not the end. If they blindly used brute force against Siam, who knew how much money and how many lives they would have to sacrifice to establish a complete victory here. After thinking about it, it was better to use the method of internal disintegration. The war supplies at the rear were continuously transported from Cheng City to Cambodia. Then they were transported by the people all the way to the army. There were dozens of carriages of ammunition. After more than 2 months of rest, the Lu 5th Division was ready to show their strong side again. The immigrants sent by the provinces were also in place. There were more than 1 million people. Now they were only waiting for Yang Qindong to give the order to launch the final attack. When the signal of internal strife came from Bangkok, it was time for them to march forward and conquer Bangkok in one fell swoop. It was time to end Yuliki's rule, the capital of Siam. The battle at the front had finally stopped. It was as if a boulder had been lifted from their chests. Everyone could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. As the chief contributor, Ha Chuanwang's face was full of joy. He had received accurate information from King Yuliki. From now on he did not need to go to Xinjiang. When the war was over, he could stay in the capital and enjoy life. This was the result he had been searching for. Naturally, he was overjoyed. His face was full of joy. When he heard that Minister Ma Dali wanted to see him, he did not dare to be negligent. He would not forget the reason why he was valued by the king. Ma Dali was a god that he could not afford to offend. In the diplomatic mission's courtyard, Chun Hong hurried over. When he saw Ma Dali, he heard a question that made him feel awkward, but he couldn't avoid it. It was the other party's suggestion to escort Tong Si out of the royal capital and send him to the front lines of the 5-star army. He also said that this was the will of the 5-star army. Only then the 5-star army would sit down and negotiate. General Chun, this is the will of the higher-ups. I have to obey. Of course, I'll stay behind. If nothing unexpected happens, I'll still be in charge of the peace talks. With our relationship, I'll do my best to take care of you. Ma Dali acted as if he didn't want to, but he had no choice. He even spoke in a comforting tone. Chun Hong understood Ma Dali's words. He also understood that this was a way for the 5-star army to show off their victory. However, since things had come to this, he could not refuse or stop it. Although doing so would greatly affect the morale of the Siamese soldiers, if he did not do so, would he really have to fight to the death against the aggressive 5-star army? I understand Minister Ma's intention. However, this is a serious matter. We need the king's permission. Chun Hong thought for a moment before giving an answer. Yes, but it must be fast. The higher-ups said that if they do not see Tong in person within 5 days, the attack will continue. By then, even I will be helpless. Ma Dali did not care whether Chun Hong was trying to delay or not. He expressed his attitude first. When he heard that there were only 5 days, Chun Hong became anxious. Minister Ma, the distance from here to your camp is 300 miles. 5 days, it's okay. The 5-star army will be there to welcome you. When the time comes, I will need your help. Ma Dali was prepared for this. Chun Hong could not do anything. He could only say that he would immediately explain the situation to the king and give him an answer. After leaving the courtyard, he went to the palace. When the king heard about this, he did not say anything. After a moment of silence, he stood up and left his seat. Not saying anything often represented a kind of tacit agreement. After Chun Hong received the order, he returned to the courtyard to express the king's agreement. In order to send Tong to the 5-star army's camp on time, he even urged Ma Dali to send Tong out of the city at night. It was not far from dark. Chun Hawang's plan was to send Tong out of the city at night, so that the impact would be minimized. Ma Dali would not let him do as he wished. He said that it was getting late, and he needed to rest. He would arrange for people to leave the city the next morning. At this time, Ma Dali was obviously the winner. Since he said so, regardless of whether Chun Hong liked it or not, he could only accept it. Fortunately, he had one night to prepare. He had already decided to seal off the streets the next morning. In short, he would not allow anyone to see this scene that represented the shame of Siam. He had a good idea. When he was about to leave, Ma Dali broke his dream. "Oh right, General Chun, our leader said that when we send Tong out of the city, we must make some noise. The 5-star army cares about our reputation. You started this war. If you do something wrong, you have to admit it. Okay. Chun Hong felt bitter, but he had to agree. After leaving the compound, he immediately sent people to transfer over a large number of soldiers to guard the streets. In short, it was to avoid any trouble as much as possible. Some things could not be changed by one's will. Yang Chendong had already planned this. When Tong Si was taken away from the dungeon, some things had already been decided. How could there not be any trouble? If that was the case, how could the morale of the soldiers and the people be affected? The next morning, Chun Hong came to the courtyard. It was obvious that his eyes were red. It was obvious that he had not slept the whole night. Ma Dali did not point it out. Instead, he took out the prison carriage that he had prepared. It was a carriage made of wood, and the fake Tong was locked in it. Furthermore, it was cleaned up very neatly. Not only was the dirt and dust on his face washed clean, but he was also dressed in armor and dressed like a general. Looking at this scene, Chun Hong did not know why, but he had an ominous feeling. However, since things had come to this, he could only bite the bullet. He only hoped that the people did not know what was going on. Even if they knew, they would not care. Reality slapped him in the face again. The CIA had spread the news early in the morning that Siam had admitted defeat. In order to appease the anger of the five-star army, they took the initiative to send General Tong to the enemy to show their sincerity. Chapter 1050. The people of Siam were very proud. They felt superior when they saw other people. They had never suffered such humiliation before. Therefore, many people came to the diplomatic mission compound in the morning. They wanted to prove that the rumors were false. They wanted to prove that their country was still strong and dignified. However, when the prisoner carriage came out of the compound, all their hopes were dashed. They saw a man in heavy armor standing in the carriage and parading through the streets. On his neck were the words "Guilty General Tong Si," written in Siamese. This was a blatant slap in the face. All the Siamese who saw this scene clenched their fists tightly to express their unwillingness to accept this. They felt humiliated by their country's humiliation. At this moment, their patriotism began to crumble. Some people could not help but curse. Ma Dali, who was accompanying them, wanted this effect. He glanced at Chun Hong and saw that his expression was ugly. He sneered in his heart. This is just the beginning. There will be more exciting things later. Chun Hong did not know what Ma Dali was thinking. He only hoped that the convoy would leave the city as soon as possible. Then he would bring Ma Dali back to the diplomatic compound to discuss the details of the peace talks. He was even thinking about how to appease the people, how to restore the prestige of the country, and how to unite the people. Suddenly, a loud shout broke his train of thought. A man in a servant's uniform suddenly broke through the guards and rushed to the prison wagon, shouting for his master. The Siamese soldiers in charge of guarding the carriage did not have time to react. Then something unexpected happened. The servant cried out loud, then looked at the prisoner and said, "No, you are not our general. You are not General Tong Si." The first sentence was not very clear, but the second sentence explained everything clearly. Tong Si was a fake. Stop him. Chun Hong, who had a guilty conscience, widened his eyes and cursed in his heart. He hoped that nothing would happen, but something still happened. Ma Dali, who had been waiting for this moment, asked with a dark expression, "What's going on? General Chun, shouldn't you give us an explanation?" Facing Ma Dali's questioning gaze, Ha Chunwang naturally had to deny it. He immediately said in a very firm tone, "It must be a misunderstanding. It must be a misunderstanding. How about this? Leave it to me." Chun Hong had to do something. Otherwise, things would really be messed up. If that really happened, the king might even kill him. After making a promise, Chun Hong rode out from the group and came to the prisoner's carriage. He first yelled at the servant and ordered him to be taken away. At the same time, he said to the surrounding people who were watching the show, "This is General Tong. He attacked our good friend, the five-star army, without permission. He was punished according to the law. All right, the matter has been clarified. Everyone, don't crowd around here. Go do whatever you need to do." Previously, The rumors that Tong Si had been convicted were all hearsay. Although he was now in the prison van, it was still a mystery as to why he had been arrested. Now that Chun Hong had taken the initiative to explain himself, this was equivalent to an official response. Immediately, the surrounding commoners were unhappy. Tong was the person who had once killed the leader of the Five-Star Army. At that time, this incident was widely publicized in the royal city. Now that he had lost the battle, he was thrown out as a scapegoat to express goodwill to his former enemy. This kind of government, this kind of country was really disappointing. Why? Didn't General Tong Si attack under the king's order? Yes, otherwise, how could a general take away hundreds of thousands of troops without a decree? This doesn't make sense. Yes, we need a reasonable explanation. General Tong Si is innocent. We shouldn't bow down to the Five-Star Army. Siam is the most powerful country in the world. All kinds of shouts were different, but the meaning was very similar. It could be seen that the people were still very emotional. There were also some patriots among them. This was the foundation of Siam when it was a big city. With such outstanding people, as long as they didn't do anything that angered the heavens, what couldn't they do? Unfortunately, his good hand was ruined by Chun Hong and the others. If Hamad still had the final say, this wouldn't have happened. This was the role of a person in a powerful country. Otherwise, how could a sheep leading a herd of lions defeat a herd of sheep led by a lion? Alright, this is an order. If anyone dares to question it, they will be arrested and severely punished. Chun Hong, who didn't want to complicate matters, was angry and showed a fierce expression. This fierce expression naturally had an effect on the ordinary people. Immediately, many people shut their mouths. Anyone could see that if they said anything inappropriate at this time, there was a possibility of them being arrested. That would be too unfair. But not everyone was afraid of Chun Hong. For example, Ma Dali, who was prepared, saw that the voices of the people were about to be suppressed and knew that it was time for him to stand up. He sneered in his heart and rode forward. General Chun, I have a question. Please bring that servant over. I have something to ask. Seeing that it was Ma Dali, Chun Hong immediately smiled and said, Minister Ma, you don't have to worry about such a small matter. I can handle it. It's not a problem of whether you can handle it or not. I know that you intend to protect General Tong Si. In such a mood, perhaps you can really get a fake person to fool us. Therefore, we have to verify the person's identity. Otherwise, we will become the joke of the Five-Star Army, Ma Dali said seriously. The Five-Star Army was now waiting for Tong Si's arrival, and time was limited. If Chun Hong couldn't convince Ma Dali, he couldn't be sent to the Five-Star Army. The war had to continue, and Chun Hong couldn't bear such a big responsibility. Helplessly, he waved his hand and asked the servant who was about to be brought back. When the servant was brought back, he looked at Ma Dali in horror. Then Ma Dali said, What did you say just now? You said that this isn't General Tong Si, right? This. I might have seen wrongly. The servant seemed to know that he had made a big mistake. At this moment his voice was trembling. Don't be afraid. Just tell the truth. I can guarantee that if you tell the truth, no one will make things difficult for you. Not only that, I will also keep you by my side to protect your safety. How about it? Can you tell the truth this time? Ma Dali made a promise in front of everyone. Ma Dali's intention to protect him was very sincere. At this moment, the servant seemed to have let go of all his worries. First, he raised his head and looked at the person on the prisoner's carriage. Then he pointed at the person and said, I'm General Tong's servant. Of course, I recognize our general. However, this person is really not our general. Are you sure? Ma Dali suddenly raised his voice. I'm sure. The servant also said with a look of desperation. Perhaps he also knew that his life and safety had fallen into Ma Dali's hands. If he didn't tell the truth, only death would await him. He had no other choice. Humph. Ma Dali's cold snort reached Chun Hawang's ears. His face immediately turned ugly. General Chun, I think I need an explanation. Explain your numbness. Chun Hong really wanted to say this, but he didn't dare. Right now he was at Ma Dali's mercy. What could he say when he was at a disadvantage? Fortunately, his reaction was fast enough. He quickly raised the horsewhip in his hand and lashed out at a guard beside him. He shouted, "Speak. Who gave you the courage to give this general a fake to fool me and the noble envoy? Did you eat a bear's heart or a leopard's heart or a leopard's gall?" All right, the scapegoat had been randomly picked. The matter was resolved immediately. Madali and the others returned to the diplomatic mission's courtyard. At the same time, the servant from Tong's residence also returned with them. Presumably, with this person around, Chun Hong couldn't find a random person to fool him. Chun Hong went to the palace with a constipated expression. He didn't know what to do now that he had messed up his mission. However, the expected thunderous rage didn't happen. Perhaps the king also knew that after locking Xianghua in the dungeon and torturing him, he had no choice but to continue using this general. Furthermore, he knew about this matter. There was no way that he was being lied to. Post a notice and put Tong on the wanted list. Search every place and person related to Xianghua. Reward him heavily. I don't believe that a living person can fly to the sky, right? Ili Chi had dug into a dead end and directly linked Tong Xi's disappearance to Prime Minister Hammond. Reality proved that if the method wasn't correct, the results wouldn't be correct. 5 days passed quickly. Under Yang Chendong's premeditated plan, the army continued to advancing towards Bangkok. Along the way, the foreign soldiers who had been baptized in the battlefield went through fierce battles again and again. After 150,000 casualties, there were only 100,000 left. However, these 100,000 soldiers definitely had the combat strength of a B-grade army. Another 20,000 soldiers were sacrificed in exchange for the defeat of the Siamese East Army. Of the original 250,000 soldiers, apart from those who were killed or captured, 20,000 managed to escape back to Bangkok. Behind them was the main force of Yang Chendong's 5-star army, which consisted of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The victory of the North Army was finally decided. Under the command of the 2nd Army Luo Pe, the public security chief Long Tainan, and the Lao General He Guang, they engaged in a huge battle with the Siamese army's General Godin. Chapter 1051. Gordon lived up to his name as a general of the Siam army. Not only was he brave, but he was also good at commanding. At one point, he brought a lot of pressure and threat to the 5-star army. However, just when both sides were evenly matched, 2nd Master Lu and 6th Master Lu, the 2 firearm engineers, made their move. The cannons opened up a path and the muskets attacked. Once again, they showed the world the difference between muskets and cold weapons. Faced with the sudden attack of the 2 elite Cold Vanguard Division, Gordon could do nothing but watch helplessly as they stabbed at him like 2 sharp knives. However, he didn't choose to run away like the other generals who were enemies of the 5-star army. Instead, he chose to sacrifice himself on the battlefield. He led his personal soldiers to charge at the Cold Vanguard Division. In the end, his blood was spilled on the battlefield, and he truly fulfilled the saying that generals should die on the battlefield. When the news of Prime Minister Hammond being imprisoned came, perhaps Gordon knew that he had no way out. If he lost the battle and returned to the capital, with the jealousy of Chun Hong, he might not have a good ending. He might even implicate his family. Since that was the case, he might as well die on the battlefield. At least he could preserve his reputation and protect his family. Gordon shed blood on the battlefield and died heroically for his country. Once the news spread, the North Army was in chaos. Without a commander, they could only retreat in the face of the 5-star army. Not long after, Chiang Mai and Dongqi were conquered. In the end, only 50,000 of the 300,000 soldiers escaped back to Bangkok. While the East and North launched a fierce counterattack, the 2 divisions of the 1st Sea Army in the south re-surrounded the important city of Pattaya. With the help of artillery, they quickly breached the city. The 2nd-ranked general of the Siamese army, Nayu, died in battle. The other 2nd-ranked general, Menghua, fled back to Bangkok with 10,000 soldiers. At this point, the capital was in an awkward situation of being surrounded on 3 sides. In Bangkok, 80,000 defeated soldiers gathered. In addition to the original 100,000 elites and 200,000 new recruits, there were close to 400,000 soldiers. Just in terms of numbers, They exceeded the five-star army's 250,000 soldiers. The East Army had 125,000 soldiers, the North Army had close to 100,000, and the South Army had less than 20,000. The Siamese army only had a numerical advantage. In terms of morale, the Siamese army was a mess. Actually, when Chun Hong betrayed Tong Si and asked for peace with the five-star army, the morale of the army and the people had already started to crumble. The pitiful king of Italy didn't think about how to salvage the situation. Instead, he offered a huge reward and made it so that everyone knew about it. This only accelerated the time and process of their defeat. If one's heart was broken, it would be useless no matter how much effort they put in. Siam, which was originally a powerful country, went from glory to destruction in just half a year. Siam's territory was too small, and there was limited space to maneuver. Another reason was that the five-star army's strategy was correct. After discovering the strength of the opponent, Yang Chendong naturally changed his strategy. Using battle to nurture the army was undoubtedly the right move. Then he grabbed hold of the opponent's weakness and used a person who had been forgotten by the opponent to attack the opponent, thus causing the opponent to lose the morale of the army. Now, it seemed that it was also an excellent move. Of course, having a pig like Chun Hong as an opponent would also help things progress smoothly. Siam capital, Bangkok. The 8 gates that led to the outside world were all closed. The outer and inner city gates were filled with Siam soldiers. From afar, it was a patch of black. However, when one got closer, it was not hard to see the worry in their eyes. Siam had 800,000 regular soldiers and 200,000 reserve soldiers. However, in just over half a year, more than half of them had been killed or injured. There were only less than 400,000 soldiers left. One could imagine how they would feel if they were to go deep into the enemy's territory. Ha Chunwang was once again entrusted with a heavy responsibility. He became the great general of the city defense, and Menghua, who had escaped from the south, became the deputy general of the city defense. The two of them commanded an army of 380,000, but there was not the slightest bit of joy on their faces. General Meng, what do you think? On top of the city wall, Ha Chunwang, who was dressed in heavy armor, looked down at the five-star army. His eyes couldn't help but twitch. He had a feeling that if the other party really decided to attack the city, with those advanced cannons and guns, they wouldn't be able to stop them. Menghua was a standard 7 feet tall man. He also had a certain level of talent in leading troops. Unfortunately, he was born at the wrong time. How could his sword be a match for cannons and guns? Now that he was asked by Ha Chunwang, he only hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. He spat out 3 words with difficulty. We can't defend it. That's right, we can't defend it. Although there are 380,000 soldiers in the city, there are still 600,000 civilians. The daily expenditure is huge. Now that the people are in chaos, once the siege starts, no one knows what will happen. Since that is the case, why don't we negotiate while we still have the strength? He seemed to be talking to himself, but also seemed to be talking to Menghua. In short, he was not prepared to continue fighting. He was prepared to negotiate, and he hoped that Menghua would take the initiative to take on this task. Menghua was a smart man. Apart from his own efforts, there was also a benefactor who appreciated him. That was the captured Prime Minister Hammond. Now that the benefactor was in trouble, it was already a miracle that he was not implicated. How could he still dare to bargain? This general is willing to cooperate with the great general's orders. Ah, good. I didn't misjudge you. Then I'll leave the task of negotiating outside the city to you. Of course, I will also negotiate with the five-star army's diplomatic group inside the city. Let's work together to turn the tide. What do you think? Seeing Meng was so sincere, Chun Hong was naturally happy. Amidst his happiness, the twitching of the corner of his eyes showed his killing intent. Menghua was someone recommended by the Prime Minister. He would not put such a person in an important position. On the contrary, he would only find an opportunity to kill him. As long as the negotiation task was not completed, he would have a reason to act. Perhaps it was because of this that Menghua was so tactful. Even though he knew that the chances of negotiating were slim, He still wanted to try. What happened next was a tragedy. Mengwa led a group of over 100 people out of Bangkok to the Five-Star Army's barracks, and was successfully instigated to defect. The person who acted was Beta Persei, who had always been by Yang Chendong's side. According to the young master's plan, he first helped Mengwa analyze the situation, especially standing in Mengwa's position, and talking about many things that might happen in the future. Then he promised that as long as Mengwa was willing to surrender, not only would he be able to become a general of Siam in the future, even his noble Prime Minister Hamad, who was locked in prison, would be able to become the deputy governor of Siam. Smart people naturally knew how to choose, and Beta Persei was so considerate of him. Mengwa, who was already at the end of his rope, had no other choice. Thus, after staying in the Five-Star Army's barracks for 5 days, he returned to Bangkok. He only said that the other party disliked his position and needed someone more powerful to negotiate. Then he returned to his post. Mengwa actually came back alive, which was somewhat beyond Chun Hawang's expectations. After knowing the Five-Star Army's attitude, he was completely terrified. In short, he did not have the courage to go to the Five-Star Army's barracks to negotiate. Previously, he had lied to them about Tong Si, so what could he say now? The Five-Star Army's siege was still ongoing, and it was only a real siege. They did not intend to attack. After the initial fear, Ha Chunwang became lively again. He made a public statement that although the Five-Star Army was strong, but facing the 400,000-strong army of Bangkok, they did not have the strength to deal with it. Therefore, there was no need for everyone to panic. As long as time passed, the surrounding countries and factions would definitely step in, and the matter would be resolved. When Ha Chunwang's words spread out, it did indeed give the panicked hearts of the people in the city a dose of tranquilizer. Everyone was no longer so afraid. However, the streets began to become chaotic, especially the food in the grain stores, which doubled. There was no other way. No one knew how long this siege would last. Food was the most important thing to the people, so they had to prepare more food. This kind of behavior quickly made Bangkok fall into an extremely awkward situation. No one actually attacked the city, and it was chaotic internally. This really made people not know what to say. Yang Chendong did not have anything to say. His attention was now split between MLL Island in the south and Yunnan in the north. The siege of MLL Island had lasted for more than half a year. The so-called king of Dafei, Abu Bakr, had also been trapped in the capital for half a year. After a long siege, the internal chaos had become prominent. It was only a matter of time before they were captured. However, the changes in Yunnan in the north were somewhat unexpected. Under the pincer attack of Nanming and Shiping King, Zhu Huichen finally could not hold on. Then he did something that many people did not expect. He actually contacted the Bangla Kingdom and asked them to send troops to help him attack Shiping King's troops. He also promised that all the captured territory and population would be handed over to the other party, and he would not receive any benefits. In order to survive, Zhu Huichen did not hesitate to betray the interests of his ancestors, and even the dignity of the Han people. Such a good thing made the Bangla Kingdom tempted. As the saying goes, if you don't take advantage of benefits, you are a bastard. They really sent out a general, Rajiv, to lead 100,000 troops through the barren mountains, and entered the strategic town behind Yunnan to launch a fierce attack. As soon as 100,000 Bangla people appeared, Shiping King Mu Bin was caught off guard. Without any preparation, he repeatedly lost Jiangtu City, Manmo City, and other strategic towns. After losing Mengding City, Mu Bin had no choice but to lead his troops to fight. Zhu Huichen took this opportunity to counterattack. Shiping King's army was defeated. They abandoned their base in Kunming City and fled to Kelisai. Then letters of request for help were sent to Nanming and the Five-Star Army. Chapter 1052. After receiving the news, Yang Chendong looked at the contents of the telegram, his eyes filled with rage. This is seeking death. He admitted that the appearance of this little butterfly had changed many things, but there was one thing that had not changed, and that was the status of the Han people. Not only did it not fall, but it was also rising. Looking at the Han people under Yang Xie, Which one of them did not live with dignity? Which one of them was not proud of their identity as Han people? It was to the point that who knew how many outstanding people from other races wanted to join this group. Regardless of Yang Chendong's attitude towards the Ming dynasty, there was no need to say anything about his attitude towards the Han people. He thought of ways to obtain benefits for them, raise their dignity and change their lives. Seeing that the results were getting better and better, as the descendant of old Zhu, Zhu Huiping had indeed led the wolf into the house. Just this alone, who knew how many Han people would have no home to return to, who knew how many Han people would have no food to eat, leading to death. Yang Chendong, who attached great importance to the Han people, very quickly gave the order to have the 7th Division, the Heavenly Strategy Division, who was left behind in Yunnan Province, immediately rushed to Langshan and advance 100 li forward to receive all the Han people who had no home to return to due to the chaos of war. He also requested the provinces to take out a portion of the surplus food and send it to the 7th Division to ensure that none of the Han people who rushed over would have problems due to hunger. Under such a decision, who knew how much money and resources would be wasted, but Yang Chendong still did it without hesitation. A person living in this world had to have some goals, some perseverance, so what if he had to pay a price for it? Yang Chendong's words were orders, and they had to be completed without any hesitation. Immediately after the telegram was sent out, the provinces began to move. Telegram to Madali Minghua and the relevant intelligence personnel hidden in the city. I will only give them 5 days. After 5 days, we will launch an attack on Bangkok. Yang Chendong did not want to wait any longer. Based on the current situation, the besieged Bangkok would collapse in at most half a year due to the lack of food. However, the unexpected appearance of the Bangladeshi soldiers had ruined his plan, and he could not continue to wait. Within Bangkok, Menghua was currently standing in the air in his own courtyard. It had been a few days since Menghua had returned to the city. Other than reporting the progress of the peace talks, he had been cooped up in the house and had not gone out. He knew very well that he was in the way of some people because he held military power. This time, it was obvious that they wanted to kill him with a borrowed knife and punish him for his crime. Fortunately, the 5-star army didn't want to make things difficult for him. After keeping him for no use, they let him go. Then he found an excuse to get away with it. However, this didn't mean that he was fine. On the contrary, if he didn't know how to restrain himself, he was afraid that there would be bigger problems coming for him. For this reason, he decided to give up his power and stay in seclusion. This way, some people should be able to let go. He had been busy all this while. Naturally, he was not used to stopping abruptly. However, what made Menghua even more dissatisfied was that the streets were too chaotic. Even if he stayed in the courtyard, he could still feel it. He heard from the servants that due to the city gates being sealed, the prices of goods were constantly rising. Some poor people could no longer afford to live, and there were even cases of robbery on the streets. This was why it was so chaotic. There are so many soldiers in the city. Don't they care? Hearing this answer, Menghua's face was full of disbelief. He couldn't understand. With nearly 400,000 Siamese soldiers in the city, how could they cause such chaos? Soldiers? Many of the robbers are actually soldiers in disguise, the servant said with a snort of contempt. Menghua's face immediately turned ugly. He almost forgot that soldiers were not treated well. It was a time of war. How many rich families were willing to send their children to join the army? In order to survive, they had no choice but to do so. When he thought about how even soldiers were robbing on the streets, Menghua could imagine how chaotic the city was. From this, he was even more certain that surrendering to the 5-star army was the right choice. At least, if they wanted to solve this chaos, only they could do it. His mentality had changed. When Yang Chendong's order was secretly sent to his residence by the CIA, Menghua decided to cooperate with him. This was also for the sake of fewer Siamese civilians. After all, he couldn't see any hope in the current Siamese government. Remember, the 5-star army will attack the South Gate tonight. When you hear the sound of cannons, it's time for you to take action. After the messenger reminded him, he walked out as a delivery man. Looking at the messenger's back, Menghua's heart was filled with emotions. Since the beginning of the war, Bangkok had been searching for dangerous people in the city. More than half a year had passed, and these people were still in the city. If it was just luck, it wouldn't be reasonable. The most likely explanation was that they had paid for everything. When did Siamese become so decadent? This made it even more impossible for people to see the existence of hope. When Mengwa received the order, General Chun Hong also received an invitation from Ma Dali. Ma Dali wanted to invite him over for a meal to discuss the future. Although there were emissaries from the five-star army who came with Mengwa, Ma Dali was still the main force in the negotiations. Chun Hong didn't dare to neglect his request. He immediately brought 30 soldiers and rushed to the diplomatic compound. In his opinion, Bangkok was still the capital of Siamese. It was still his territory. No one would dare to make a move on him. However, he soon realized that he was wrong. What he didn't expect was that Ma Dali had a platoon of guards by his side. It was only because they were well protected that no one was able to see through them. This platoon could play a role in turning the situation around at a critical moment. The sun set and the moon rose. A day of darkness was about to arrive. Mengwa donned the armor of a general and summoned 50 soldiers in his residence. He was ready for action. Boom! As the night fell, the sound of cannons came as expected. This was the first time that the five-star army had fired the cannons since they besieged the city. It scared the unprepared soldiers and civilians in the city. For a moment, the streets were filled with shouts. Fortunately, there was a curfew in Bangkok. Otherwise, he couldn't imagine what would happen if so many people were running around on the streets. The cannons finally sounded. Mengwa led 50 soldiers out of his residence and headed straight for the dungeon. The first thing he wanted to do was to rescue Prime Minister Hamad. This was also the condition of surrender that Mengwa had proposed. Yang Chendong had readily agreed to it. Mengwa led his soldiers out of the residence. This news was quickly discovered by the Siamese spies in charge of keeping an eye on the area. The news was then spread. General Mengwa was naturally unaware of all this. Now that he had decided to take action, he couldn't care less. With his identity as the deputy general guarding the royal capital, Mengwa entered the dungeon without much effort. He saw Prime Minister Hamad locked up in the innermost cell. At this moment, Hamad didn't have the slightest demeanor of a prime minister. His hair was disheveled and his body reeked of a foul stench. He wasn't much better than a beggar on the streets. However, his eyes were still very bright. When he saw Mengwa leading a group of soldiers in front of him and breaking the lock on the cell, he sighed and said, "Sigh, why bother? Prime Minister, it's not that I didn't do it because I knew the law. You have been wronged. Tong Si's matter was clearly done by a despicable person. The king was also worried that your achievements would shock the emperor. That's why he took the blame." Mengwa said with tears in his eyes. "But you?" Hamad seemed to want to say something, but he quickly shook his head and asked, "Tell me, what's the situation outside?" "Prime Minister, the five-star army has already surrounded the royal capital. The royal capital could be breached at any moment. Due to the jealousy of Chun Hong, I was sent to negotiate with the five-star army a few days ago. I almost lost my life and surrendered to them." When he said the last sentence, Mengwa lowered his head. After all, no matter the reason, surrendering to the enemy wasn't something to be proud of. He was really afraid that Prime Minister would reprimand him. Hearing that a general was sent to negotiate, an indescribable anger flashed across Hamad's face. He then sighed and said, "Forget it. If that's the case, I'm afraid that the fate of Siam will come to an end. No one can reverse it. Prime Minister, the five-star army has already agreed. After breaching the royal capital, you will be the deputy governor here. I will be the general here. As long as we care for the people of Siam, we can still do many things for them." Without the storm that he imagined, Mengwa raised his head and said with a hopeful expression, "Ha ha." Before Prime Minister could reply, a burst of laughter sounded behind him. A group of 200 people suddenly appeared. The one at the front was a dark-skinned man. After he laughed, he said, "You really betrayed Siam. If that's the case, then prepare to die." "Captain Lick?" Mengwa turned his head. When he saw who it was, his face was filled with shock. Lick was the captain of Ha Chuanwang's guards and was deeply trusted. Although his rank was slightly low, in Siam where Gordon and the other generals died, he was already considered a famous general. Since he appeared here, needless to say, it must be Hamad's order. With the appearance of Lik, a battle to the death was unavoidable. Looking at the 50 personal guards who had come with him, and then seeing that there were 200 opponents, Mengwa only hesitated for a moment before he drew his sword. He looked at the other party and said, "Since that's the case, there's no point in saying anything more. Let me see your skills. Kill. Kill." More than 200 people began to fight each other. The clashing sounds of swords and sabers rang out incessantly as they fought in the small dungeon. The soldiers that followed Mengwa were not only loyal, they were also more skilled than normal soldiers. If it was on the battlefield, it wouldn't be difficult for 50 of them to fight 200 people. However, Lik was not to be trifled with. The 200 people that he brought this time were also veterans of the battlefield. They had the ability to fight 1 against 2. Although they were weaker than the soldiers on the other side, they had the advantage in numbers. When it came to a fight, their advantage was very obvious. Chapter 1053. With 4 against 1, it didn't take long for over 20 of Mengwa's personal guards to die. Moreover, they were constantly forced to retreat. If this continued, they probably wouldn't be able to save Xianghua, and Mengwa would also die here. However, all of this changed with the sound of arrows being shot. A group of about 50 men in black suddenly charged out. They were all dressed in black and had black masks covering their faces. They held small crossbows in their hands. With just one wave of attack, they killed dozens of Siamese soldiers and opened up a bloody path for the Siamese soldiers. Using this opportunity, Mengwa led the remaining soldiers out and met up with the men in black. It was also at this moment that Mengwa saw clearly that the leader of the black-clothed group was actually a woman. Although he couldn't see her face clearly due to the black cloth covering her face, he could still make an accurate judgment based on her figure and voice. "General Mengwa, we are here on the orders of the 6th young master to receive you. Leave this place to us. Go to the east gate first and open the gate. Right, this is for you. It will help you." The woman in the lead was the person in charge of Bangkok, Chingxi. As she spoke, she placed a sword in Mengwa's hand. This is Chun Hawang's sword?" Mengwa was shocked when he saw the sword in his hand. "That's right. Chun Hong has been placed under house arrest by us. You are now the highest-ranking officer in the army. Go do what you should do." Chingxi nodded, and then gave the order to the dozens of men in black behind her to kill the enemy. These were all brothers of the CIA's operations team. Before joining, they had all received secret training. In terms of skills, they might not be as good as the Lung brothers, but they were not far off. With the 3-on-3 battle formation, they were confident in dealing with 100 Siamese soldiers. Mengwa took the sword and looked back at Xianghua Hamad, who had been rescued. He nodded lightly and left with his 4 soldiers. After leaving the dungeon, he rode straight to the east gate. At this moment in Bangkok, cannons were fired from time to time. The soldiers patrolling the streets mostly hid in places they thought were safe. Mengwa led the 4 riders all the way to the east gate, where they saw thousands of Siamese soldiers standing guard. "I was appointed by General Ha Chunwang to open the city gates. Anyone who tries to stop me will be killed." Raising the sword in his hand high up, Mengwa's shout rang out, causing many of the soldiers guarding the city to be dumbfounded. What the hell was this about opening the city gates? Don't tell me there's no need to continue guarding? A young Siamese general stepped forward and expressed his doubts. Mengwa did not kill him. After all, the man in front of him was a Siamese soldier. He explained, "General Ha Chunwang has received the king's permission to open the gate and surrender. Now all we need to do is to open the gate. This way, we can avoid dying in the war." "I see." After hearing this, the young Siamese general nodded in agreement. Most of the soldiers did not have the confidence to defend a lone city. Although there were many who were not afraid of death, no one wanted to sacrifice their lives for nothing. Now that there was an order from above, no one would defend the city gates. The thick gate slowly opened from the inside. The 5-star army, who had already reached the city gates in the dark, surged forward. The one at the front was the 5th Flu Division. They all held powerful firearms to open the way. The 6th Young Master's order was that if there was any danger, they could fire on their own. However, there were no gunshots. With Mengwo around, the soldiers had already given up on resisting. The 5th Flu Division quickly took over the duty of guarding the city gates. Behind them were the brothers of the 1st Cavalry Division. With Division Commander Tian Hu in the lead, the mighty cavalry entered the city. Then, according to the plan, they charged straight for the capital of Bangkok. Following closely behind was the new army's 1st Cavalry Division. After Division Commander Lu Zhua and Mengwo met up, they headed towards the northern city gate. They were going to open it up like before, and lead the Northern Army's 5-star army into the city. In the diplomatic compound, General Ha Chunwang looked at the sword on his neck with a hopeless expression. Then he looked bitterly at Ma Dali and said, "Commander Ma, do you think that by kidnapping me, the 5-star army will be able to enter the city smoothly?" Ha Chunwang had only brought 30 soldiers to the compound to express his sincerity. He did not expect that the other party would actually dare to make a move on him. Now he had failed in his own territory. "What do you think?" Ma Dali answered calmly. He even had the opportunity to take a sip of tea. He looked very confident. A platoon of Lung Feng suddenly attacked and caught Ha Chunwang off guard. The 30 guards he brought with him were either killed or injured. He himself was also subdued, and his sword was taken away. In the face of this sudden turn of events, he was naturally stunned. However, he knew that this time there was nothing he could do. Without him as the commander, if the 5-star army really launched an attack, how would he deal with it? Ha Chunwang did not know that the 5-star army had already entered the city. The east and north gates opened without shedding a drop of blood. Faced with the 5-star army entering the city, the streets were already in chaos. Some of the Siamese soldiers resisted on their own without orders. However, most of the soldiers retreated to their barracks. Without orders, they did not know whether they should resist or not. They simply retreated to their barracks and waited for orders. The 1st Cavalry Division that had slaughtered their way into the inner city was like an unstoppable sword. Along the way, anyone who stood in their way was quickly eliminated. In less than 2 hours, they had arrived at the palace. At this moment, facing the sudden arrival of the 5-star army, the palace was already in chaos. The 5,000 palace guards who were left behind to guard the palace started a desperate resistance. At the same time, they sent out a call for reinforcements, hoping that reinforcements would arrive before the cavalry breached the palace. However, it was useless. How powerful was the 1st Cavalry Division? When faced with pure cold weapons, even Lung Feng was no match for them. Not to mention the palace guards who were used to living in luxury and were used to being superior. These people were arrogant. It was useful to scare ordinary soldiers. However, when faced with the elite 5-star army cavalry who were used to life and death, they did not even take an hour. After throwing nearly 2,000 corpses, they completely collapsed. Some fled and some surrendered. The king of Siam, Ili Chi, was sitting in the main hall in his royal attire. Beside him stood hundreds of palace guards. However, at this moment, their faces were filled with fear. Obviously, these people knew what they were about to face and were already terrified. However, Ili Chi's expression was calm. After all, he was the king who had founded the glorious era of the great city. He was still very courageous. He even once thought that the glory of Siam was about to arrive. As the king, he had a bright future. However, he had no choice but to meet the 5-star army. The sudden appearance of this army destroyed his original plans for the country and for his life. If the king had read about the 3 kingdoms, he would have immediately thought of He Shengdong's idea. The moment the cannons roared above the capital, he had a bad feeling in his heart. His intuition told him that the 5-star army was about to attack the city. He immediately ordered someone to look for Chun Hong, to discuss the upcoming battle of defending the city. Unfortunately, he did not find him. Not long after, news came that the city gate had been breached and the 5-star army had entered the city. When he first heard the news, Ili Chi almost fell from his throne. He knew that everything was over. The 5-star army had entered the city without shedding any blood. He was afraid that he would be in danger soon. He immediately gave the order to summon more troops to protect the palace. However, at this moment, he realized that the commander's seal was not in his hands. He could only blame himself for trusting Chun Hong too much. He was afraid that Chun Hong would not be able to command the troops and handed over the commander's seal. Now he did not have the commander's seal. Mobilizing the troops was just a thought. What happened next was very clear. The vanguard cavalry of the 5-star army had arrived. The 5,000 palace guards were defeated in less than an hour. As the king, Ilichi knew that the situation had changed. However, he did not want to throw away his dignity as the king of the country. Thus, he brought over 100 guards to guard the palace. At this moment, he still had a glimmer of hope. That was that the troops that came to save the king could arrive. When that time came, with the advantage in numbers, he might be able to fight against the 5-star army. As long as he could hold on for long enough, the other countries that did not like the 5-star army or did not want to see the 5-star army grow stronger would take action. When that time came, there might be a chance of victory. Ilichi, who had hope in his heart, saw the 5-star army in front of him. He knew that the situation had changed. In the end, all thoughts were just thoughts. You must be the king of Siam. If you surrender now, you can still live. Your guards can also be spared from death. Tian Hu walked in with 2 swords in his hands. He looked at Ilichi, who was still sitting on the throne, and said loudly. Ilichi was not moved by Tian Hu's persuasion. He wanted to continue resisting. Perhaps the longer he held on, the more chances he would have. Since Ilichi did not surrender, Tian Hu did not hold back. He knew that there were close to 400,000 Siamese soldiers in the city. If he did not seize the moment, there might be a change in the situation. A ruthless look flashed across his eyes. He pointed to the opposite side and said, "Archers, get ready. Other than the king, kill everyone else." Chapter 1054. In terms of archery, if the 1st Cavalry Division said that they were the 2nd, then no one would dare to say that they were the 1st. They were able to hit their target 9 times out of 10 when they were riding on a bumpy horse, not to mention when there was no interference. Now thousands of arrows were released at the same time. After just one round of arrows, less than 20 of the 100 or so palace guards were left standing. Ilichi, who was sitting there, was not threatened by the arrows, but at this moment he was still scared to the point that his face turned pale. He was a famous king, and he had also created a prosperous era, but after all, he had not experienced the killing on the battlefield. When he really faced death, he was still afraid. "Don't shoot anymore, this king surrenders." Finally, he could not stand the threat and surrendered. With this shout, the seemingly powerful Siam immediately collapsed, becoming a stepping stone for the 5-star army to continue to rise. The long night finally passed, and the moment the sky slowly brightened, more 5-star army entered the city. Until noon, with the King Ilichi's declaration of surrender, and the 1st grade General Ha Chunwang took out the commander's seal to command the army, Siam immediately became a record in history. Yang Chendong followed the army into the city. This time, he took the risk to enter the city with the speed of lightning. Every step of the plan was very crucial. It could be said that if there was a problem at any step, it would lead to a confrontation between the 2 armies. If that was the case, he did not know how many days it would take, and how many people would have to die to capture Bangkok. Fortunately, all the plans were implemented smoothly, and in the end he still won. As soon as he entered the city, Yang Chendong met the former Prime Minister Hamad and General Menghua in the palace. They would also be important talents who would help him manage and rule Siam in the future. In front of everyone, he first changed the name of Siam to Thailand Province, and then appointed a person named Zhang Zhao as the governor of Thailand. This management talent, who had worked in the Chichen city for more than 4 years, was finally released, and became a real power manager. As soon as possible, restore the power of the people, restore the economy, and the migration of the population. I will ask you to do it. I hope that the next time this prince comes, this place will have changed greatly, and I will be able to see sincere and satisfied smiles on the people's faces. After stating his wishes, Yang Chendong arranged for people to send Ilichi to Crimson Nest City. He would become another king who was under house arrest there. He was not the first, nor would he be the last. The next day, Yang Chendong led the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army to the Liangshan area in the north. In his heart, he was more concerned about his Han brothers. Before he left, he also gave a certain explanation about the Thailand province and the Daf country. The 1st Sea Division went to the Daf country and surrounded the Daf country's capital with the 3rd Sea Division. The 2nd Sea Division wandered around the Gulf of Thailand to declare the sovereignty of this place and not allow any forces to enter and invade. The 2nd Army Commander Luo temporarily stayed in the Thailand province, together with a coalition of 100,000 foreigners. They were responsible for the security, defense, and the task of reorganizing the 380,000 Siam Army. The 6th Division went north to Laos province and cooperated with the governor, Luan Shaoqian, to continue to be responsible for the suppression and deterrence of the Awol dynasty. The remaining 100,000 foreigners continued to go north and followed Yang Chendong to the Liangshan area. They were responsible for the possible battle there against Nanming King Zhu Huaiqiu and the Bengal army. If there was time, Yang Chendong certainly did not want to run around. He would first stay in the newly established Thailand province for a while to stabilize the situation here. Now it was November. After a month, he would return to Crimson City before the end of the year and celebrate the new year with his wives. Especially since the first Madam, Hu Yan, was pregnant and needed him to comfort her. Time waits for no man. The Southern Ming matter concerned the safety of too many Han people. He had to rush there and deal with any problems that could happen at any time. The truth was just as Yang Chendong expected. The Southern Ming matter was indeed changing. After King Mubin of Shiping was pincered from two sides and was forced to retreat to the Kelisai region, King Nanming's army joined up with the Bengal army from the east. With their combined forces, their forces began to grow. Just in Yunnan alone, the self-proclaimed King Nanming, the second brother of Zhu Huiqin, King Guangtong, Zhu Huiqin had recruited 150,000 soldiers. After absorbing the remaining soldiers left behind by King Mubin of Shiping, in addition to the 50,000 soldiers he had brought with him, his army instantly expanded to 200,000. Along with the 100,000 Bengal army that Rajiv of Bangra had brought, the total number of soldiers reached 300,000. With 300,000 soldiers, some people had enough confidence, and even started to have thoughts of spying on the 5-star army. They were spying on the 5-star army because they had their eyes on the guns in the hands of the 5-star army. Through the information that they had obtained, they knew that there was a 5-star army with less than 10,000 people that had rushed to Lang Son. They were working with Vietnam's General Hong Jin to settle down the Han people that had sought refuge here. The 5-star army had been recruiting homeless Han people, and this matter was not a secret. Regarding this, everyone had different opinions. In this era where human rights were not valued, the lives of the commoners were like grass. This was especially so for the commoners who had no money and no food. Using the word refugees to describe them was the most appropriate. They really did not know what they could do by recruiting such people. Was it really because they had too much food to eat? Although the appearance of high-yield crops like potatoes had indeed solved the problem of the commoners' stomachs. However, with so many commoners going over, not only did they have to eat, but they also had to wear clothes and housing. All in all, it was not a small financial burden. Even if one had a large family, facing such a huge population, one would not be able to handle it. In truth, at the start of the year, when Yang Chendong was still in Chichen City, they had already started to test out the pension insurance policy. It was not much different from the future, except that the workers and commoners would pay a certain amount of insurance each year, ensuring that they would not have to worry about food and clothing in their later years. The only difference was that the age limit for men to receive insurance was set at 50 years old, while women were set at 48 years old. After all, in that era, people's lifespans were relatively short. If they could only retire at 60 years old, it would be a huge blow to everyone's enthusiasm. Because it was a trial, only the Han people could participate in the insurance. Other foreign races did not have the right to participate in this policy. Even so, they were not able to receive much gold and silver, which greatly reduced the financial burden on Qiqian City. Yang Xie was very good at earning money. This was publicly acknowledged. Their products were very diverse. And just from the business side, the profits they brought every year were shocking. However, at the same time, they could also spend money. Some provinces were still not self-sufficient, and still needed to rely on Qiqian City for subsidies. In addition, there were constant battles, and the financial pressure was immense. Once this insurance policy was released, it would indeed solve a lot of problems. It would also allow Yangshi to have the ability to continue recruiting more homeless Han people. Zhu Huichen did not know about this, nor did he care about it. What he was interested in was the firearms in the hands of the High 7th Division. He had thought that if he could obtain such advanced weapons, when he faced off against the Southern Ming Empire, his confidence would be greatly boosted. Even unifying the entire Southern Ming Empire would not be a problem. With this thought in mind, Zhu Huichi looked for General Rajiv of the Bangladesh Army, and Wu Yingtu of the Miao province, who followed him to discuss whether they should ambush a 5-star army and snatch their weapons. The three of them gathered together, and when they heard that they were going to face off against the 5-star army, Wu Yingtu, who knew the details, was the first to speak. It is said that the 5-star army is very powerful. It is not wise to be their enemy. Speaking of which, Wu Yingtu had also heard about the encounter between Miao Jinlong and the 5-star army. He had some lingering fears, and was even a little scared. The remaining General Rajiv was dumbfounded. Obviously, his understanding of the 5-star army was lacking. He could not understand why Wu Yingtu, who looked very sturdy, would be so cautious and even a little afraid when talking about this army. Zhu Huichen laughed. Wu Fang, although the 5-star army is powerful, we have already received news that their main force is attacking Siam. There are 400,000 troops there. It is enough to make them suffer. Taking advantage of this opportunity, we should be able to deal with the 5-star army. Moreover, I never fight an unprepared battle. I have already arranged for 3,000 elite soldiers to disguise themselves as ordinary Han people and head to Liangshan shelter. Once we launch an attack, we can attack from both sides and victory will definitely belong to us. At this time, Guangdong King no longer hid his trump card and showed it to everyone. At this point, Wu Yingtu finally stopped talking. After all, his Miao army only had 10,000 soldiers out of the 200,000 soldiers. If not for the fact that he brought the elites of the Miao army, he would not even have the right to speak. Rajiv was a person who was proficient in the Chinese language. This was the main reason why he could lead 100,000 Bengali soldiers. When he heard that he could take advantage of the situation, he could not help but say, "Since that is the case, what are we waiting for? Your Highness, let's make our move tonight." "Sai, there is no hurry. The agreed time is 3 days later. We still need to wait for the brothers over there to be ready," Zhu Huichen said calmly. Obviously, he already had a card up his sleeve. The 3,000 elite soldiers were indeed arranged to enter Liangshan shelter. Regarding this matter, the commander of the 7th Army, Tian Su, who was in charge of the shelter, and the temporary general of the shelter, Vietnamese General Hong Jin, knew nothing about it. There were simply too many Han people who came to seek refuge and protection every day. There were so many that they did not even have the time to distinguish between them. This also caused the shelter to be a mix of good and bad people, and even incidents of fighting occurred frequently. Chapter 1055. As long as no lives were lost, the 5-star army would not care. After all, they did not have enough manpower to do so. The 7th Army had over 8,000 men, and even with the 15,000 men of Vietnam General Hong Jin, they only had about 20,000 men. Facing the hundreds and thousands of Hans that were rushing over every day, they were not strong enough. "General Hong, I've already received a telegram. The matter at Xianluo City has been resolved. Currently, the 6th Young Master is leading 2 cavalry units north. We just need to stabilize the situation. Once the 6th Young Master arrives, everything will be fine." Tian Su looked at the number of people in the shelter and felt worried. However, he did not show it on his face. As a general, One of the most important things was to learn to be calm. No matter what the situation was, they would not panic. As an experienced veteran, Tiansu naturally understood this principle. When he heard that the sixth young master was leading his elite cavalry towards Lang's Sun, the worried Hongjin heaved a sigh of relief. That's good. How about this? I'll immediately arrange for the troops to send a group of people back. Otherwise, as the number of people in the shelter increases, there will be problems sooner or later. Arranging for the troops to send the people back would require them to pass through the Lang Sun rainforest. That meant that they would have to split up. Tiansu, who was already lacking in manpower, did not object. He agreed and said, "All right, I'll leave it to General Hong." Just like that, the five-star army, which was originally lacking in manpower, was split up by another 3,000 soldiers. As such, the total number of soldiers left in Langshan was only slightly over 20,000. However, there were still 50,000 civilians left in Langshan. Furthermore, more and more people were arriving every day. At this rate, the pressure would only increase. What was even more unexpected to Tiansu was that among the nearly 50,000 people, there were also 3,000 elite soldiers sent by King Guangtong, Zhu Huihua. They disguised themselves as ordinary people and scattered around. In the chaotic situation, they did not attract the attention of others. It was only on the night of the appointment that these people began to gather together. Some of the smarter ones had already figured out the timing and method of the five-star army's change of guard. Considering the limited manpower, Tiansu decided to use the Cold Front Army and the Vietnamese army to defend together. They would rotate every 6 hours, and there would be 4 shifts a day. Each shift consisted of a battalion of Cold Vanguard soldiers and 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers. The Vietnamese army was mainly in charge of the safety and order of the shelter, while the Cold Front was in charge of defending the outer perimeter, preventing the Prince of Little Naming's army and the Bangladesh army from launching an attack on them. On this point, the Heavenly Strategy Division Master and General Hong Jin came to an agreement. They did not think that the opponent had the guts to provoke them. However, for the sake of safety, they still made a basic defense. That night, Battalion Commander Zhou Shishue brought a battalion of 400 soldiers to take over the defense. They would be responsible for the security of the perimeter for the next 6 hours. At that time, the sky would be bright. It was November. Even in the south, it was cold in the mornings. After the soldiers arrived at their positions, they quickly quieted down. In order to preserve the heat in their bodies, there were very few people who spoke. After Battalion Commander Zhou began to change the defense, Zhu Jian also began to gather his 3,000 subordinates to prepare for a counterattack. According to Prince Guangtong's plan, they had decided to launch a surprise attack at night, leaving them less than an hour. Zhu Jian was a subordinate that Zhu Huiyan had favored, and this time he had given him such an important mission. General Zhu also wanted to make use of this opportunity to showcase his skills. As he gathered his subordinates, he called for a few of the leaders and instructed them. In a while, we will first deal with the 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers. Their strength is average and not hard to deal with. After that, we will set fire to the perimeter. After that, the 500 of you will join me to deal with the 5-star army. They have many firearms in their hands. Once we can get our hands on one, we will have done a great deed. The more we get, the greater the merit. Understand? Please rest assured, General Zhu, we know what to do. A few of the leaders had a smug look on their faces, before they laughed coldly, as though their evil plan was about to succeed. Time passed by slowly, and there was only a quarter of an hour left before the agreed time to launch the attack. Zhu Jian then gestured for them to start moving, and the 3,000 elite soldiers immediately pulled out their weapons, as they slowly made their way towards the 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers. How could the 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers know that something like this would happen? Some of them were still leaning against the trees, resting with their eyes closed. Suddenly, their mouths were covered by someone, and they felt a sharp pain in their necks. Their strength was quickly drained away, and their blood flowed out. This scene happened in many different places, and one by one, the unprepared Vietnamese soldiers were killed. In order to cover up the stench of blood, and to prevent the five-star army from coming to their aid, huge fires started to burn all over the shelter, and soon after, the sky was dyed red by the blazing flames. Haha, Zhu Jian and the rest have already begun to move. Order the entire army to attack. On the outskirts of Lang Mountain, Prince Guangtong Zhu Huayun's eyes flashed with a pleased glint as he gave the order to attack. At the same time, he turned to General Rajiv and said, "This time, it's up to your cavalry." "That's easy. We have 20,000 cavalry, and it's enough to trample any enemy formation," Rajiv said with a face full of pride, as he also had the confidence to do so. After all, when cavalry faced infantry, they had a natural advantage. In this way, the hooves of the horses stomped on the ground, and the rumbling of the ground resounded. In the darkness, a black mass of enemies flew toward the Langshan asylum. The moment the flames started to burn behind them, Zhou Shishua knew that things weren't looking good, and a few of his company commanders had also requested for a counterattack. However, he felt that things weren't that simple. Was it just a few fires behind them? Thinking about the 300,000 enemy troops, Zhou Shishua decisively gave up on the idea of turning back to extinguish the flames. Instead, he ordered all the soldiers to focus their attention and prevent the enemy from breaking through from the front. Zhou Shishua's estimation was right, and soon he heard the sound of hooves stomping on the ground. His intuition told him that the number of cavalry coming from the opposite side wouldn't be too small, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was a magnificent army. He immediately shouted, "Everyone take out grenades. Once the enemy is too close, we'll fight with them." The threat of firearms to cavalry was still too small. After all, the war horses were too fast, and they might not even be able to fire a few shots before the enemy arrived in front of them. Only weapons like grenades could stop the enemy for a moment, but of course, they also had to pay a heavy price. However, at this moment, Zhou Shishua had already disregarded his own life and death. What he was thinking about now was how to buy time for the army behind him, and the shelter to retreat. As for his own battalion, since fate had chosen him, they could only resign themselves to fate. After the order was given, the 400 soldiers of the battalion all raised their spirits, and then looked forward with a deep expression. At this moment, their hands holding their guns tightened, and their eyes became more profound. At this moment, the 400 soldiers already knew what it meant when the battalion commander didn't give the order to retreat, but no one said a word. Since they had chosen to join the cold front, they had to be prepared to face death at any time. This was the oath they had sworn the moment they joined the army. Family, relatives, friends, comrades, farewell. I believe that you will avenge us. Fire. Under the dim moonlight, Zhou Shishua noticed that the black shadows were getting closer and closer, and he immediately gave the order to fire. The soldiers of the cold front were prepared to die, and now they were firing bullets out of their guns. At this moment, they didn't care about aiming at the enemy, nor did they care about saving bullets. At this moment, only the sound of gunfire could be heard, and light flashed out one after another, shooting towards the approaching enemy. At the rear of the camp, the sound of hooves could be heard from the fire at the front. Division Commander Tian Su and Vietnamese General Hong Jin both walked out of their tents. Not good, the enemy has really launched an attack. General Hong quickly split the men into two groups. One group will take the supplies, while the other group will rush to the shelter. Take as many people as you can. If you can't take the supplies, burn them on the spot. Don't leave them for the enemy. The rest of the 7 divisions, follow me and attack. Tian Su only stayed silent for a few breaths before he made a series of military arrangements. Division Commander Tian, you should retreat with us. Hong Jin's face was filled with anxiety. Everyone knew that if they stayed behind to fight the enemy, there would definitely be sacrifices. The members of the cold front were all treasures. General Hong, there is no need to persuade me. What I said just now is a military order. Please carry it out. As he spoke, Tian Su had already taken the gun holster from the guard and hung it on his body. Then he led the main force of the 7 divisions and rushed forward. Tian Su's first goal was not to put out the fire, because at this moment, the fire was already too big to be controlled. What he wanted to do now was to rescue the battalion that was responsible for defending the perimeter. That was the 400 Cold Front Brothers. However, the soldiers of the 7 divisions had only rushed forward a few hundred meters when a series of explosions sounded in their ears. From afar, they could see flashes of fire. Seeing this, Division Commander Tianzi couldn't help but punch a tree beside him, his face filled with anger. As a soldier of the Cold Front, he naturally knew what caused the explosion. It was definitely caused by a grenade being ignited. Considering the limited range of the grenade, didn't that mean that their comrades had already come into close contact with the enemy? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.